The August sun hammered down on Red Hollow like a blacksmith's fist, turning the dirt streets into ribbons of dust that clung to everything: clothes, skin, hope. Lenora stood on the train platform with her single leather case, her traveling dress already grimy from 3 days of soot and sweat, and watched the town pretend not to watch her back. She knew what they saw: a woman past 30 with a square jaw and broad shoulders, hands that had scrubbed floors and tended sick brothers instead of learning piano. Hair pulled back so tight it made her face look harder than it was, because loose curls cost time she'd never had. She wasn't the kind of woman men wrote songs about. But Samuel Garrett had written her letters for 8 months, and those letters had said different things. They'd said he wanted a partner, not a portrait. They'd said he valued strength over softness. Standing 20 feet away, Samuel Garrett was having a different conversation with his face. He stood beside the post office with 3 other men, all of them dressed in Sunday clothes despite it being Thursday. One of them, tall, silver-haired, wearing a suit too fine for a frontier town, leaned close and said something that made Samuel's ears go red. But it was Samuel's eyes that told the whole story. They'd gone flat the moment he'd seen her step down from the train car. Not disappointed, revolted. Lenore had seen that look before. In Boston, when she'd asked Mr. Patterson for clerk work, and he'd looked at her like she'd proposed something indecent. In Philadelphia, when her sister's husband had suggested maybe Lenora should consider staying unmarried, save everyone the trouble. She'd developed a thick skin for cruelty by necessity, the way you develop calluses from hard work. But something about traveling 2,000 miles to see it again made the old armor feel thin. She picked up her case and walked toward him anyway. The platform boards creaked under her practical boots. Not delicate things, but the kind that lasted. Behind her, the train huffed and began its slow departure, taking with it her last easy escape. "Mr. Garrett?" Her voice came out steady. That much, at least, she could control. Samuel flinched like she'd slapped him. The 3 men beside him didn't bother hiding their amusement. The silver-haired one smiled, and it was the smile of a man watching a horse break its leg. Terrible, but entertaining. "You're, Miss Vale." Samuel's voice pitched high with something between disbelief and accusation. "I am. We've corresponded for—" "You didn't mention you were—" He gestured vaguely at all of her, his hand fluttering like a trapped bird. "I thought your letters sounded like what?" Lenora kept her chin level. "Like a person?" One of the other men, younger, with a thick mustache and mean eyes, snorted. "Sammy thought he was getting something prettier, didn't you, Sammy?" The small crowd that had gathered to watch the train arrival pressed closer now, sensing blood. A woman in a green dress whispered something to her companion behind a gloved hand. 2 boys sitting on a hitching post grinned at each other. Even the station manager had stopped pretending to check freight logs. Samuel's face went from red to white. "I can't. This isn't what I agreed to. You agreed to marry me." Lenora heard her voice go cold and sharp. "I have your letters. 14 of them. You asked me to come here. You sent money for the train fare." "I'll pay you back the money." Samuel fumbled in his jacket pocket, his hands shaking. "I'll send it. I just need time to I don't want the money back." Lenora felt something crack inside her chest, something that had been holding together for a very long time. "I want what you promised." The silver-haired man stepped forward then, still wearing that awful smile. He moved with the casual authority of someone used to being obeyed. "Miss Vale, isn't it? I'm Gideon Voss. I own the bank here in Red Hollow." He spoke like he was doing her a favor by knowing her name. "It seems there's been an unfortunate misunderstanding. Perhaps I can help facilitate your return journey. The bank would be happy to provide a loan for—" "No." The word came out harder than she'd meant it to, loud enough that the watching crowd shifted and murmured. "Mr. Garrett made a commitment, in writing. I left everything to come here because he asked me to." "Yes, well—" Gideon's smile tightened. "Sometimes what looks good on paper doesn't quite match reality, does it?" The crowd laughed. Not everyone. Some people just looked uncomfortable, but enough. Enough that the sound of it wrapped around Lenora like rope. Samuel wouldn't meet her eyes. He stared at the ground between them like it held answers. "I'm sorry," he mumbled. "I just can't." "Can't or won't? Does it matter?" It was the silver-haired banker who answered. It doesn't, actually. The young man has made his position clear. Now, Miss Vale, I really do think the most dignified course of action would be to, thank you, Mr. Voss, but I don't recall asking for your thoughts on dignity. His smile finally died. For just a second, something cold flickered behind his eyes. Something that made Lenora think of winter rivers, beautiful and deadly. Then it was gone, replaced by polite concern. Of course. Forgive my intrusion. I simply hate to see a woman in distress. He didn't look like he hated it at all. Samuel had already started backing away, putting distance between himself and the situation like it might be contagious. The man with the mustache clapped him on the shoulder. Come on, Sammy, let's get you a drink. They left. Just walked away while Lenora stood there with her case and her crumpled future, the subject of 20 whispered conversations happening all around her. She stood there for a long moment, breathing carefully through her nose, forcing herself not to cry in front of these people. She'd cried twice in her life where others could see. Once when her mother died, once when they buried her youngest brother. She wouldn't give Red Hollow a third time. The crowd began to disperse. Their entertainment concluded. The woman in the green dress looked back twice, her expression caught between pity and something meaner. The boys on the hitching post were already telling the story to someone who'd missed it, their voices high with exaggerated drama. Only one person approached her. A girl, maybe 17, with dark hair escaping from a braid and flour dust on her apron. She had the kind of pretty face that would have made Samuel Garrett write better letters, but her eyes were kind. I'm Mary Chen, she said quietly. My father runs the general store. Do you have somewhere to stay? Lenora realized she was still holding her case like a shield. She set it down carefully. No. There's a boarding house on Turner Street. Mrs. Hadley runs it. She's not cheap, but she's fair. How much? $3 a week. Meals included. Lenora did the math in her head. She had $42 left after the train fare, money she'd saved over 2 years of taking in washing and mending. At $3 a week, she had maybe 3 months before she'd be flat broke in a town that had already decided who she was. Thank you, she said. Mary nodded and started to leave, then turned back. That thing Mr. Garrett did? That wasn't right. People here, they're not all like him. But her eyes said something different. They said, most of them are exactly like him. Mrs. Hadley's boarding house smelled like boiled cabbage and lye soap. The landlady herself was a compact woman with steel gray hair and the kind of face that had forgotten how to smile sometime around the Civil War. She looked Lenora up and down with the assessing eye of someone pricing livestock. $3 a week, she said, paid in advance. Breakfast at 6, supper at 7. You miss a meal? That's your loss. No men in rooms, no drinking, no cooking in your room. Laundry costs extra. Fine. You planning to stay long? Lenora met her eyes. I don't know yet. Something shifted in Mrs. Hadley's expression. Not quite approval, but maybe recognition. Rooms upstairs, third door on the left. Supper's in an hour. The room was small and spare. An iron bed frame with a thin mattress. A washstand with a chipped basin. A single window that looked out onto the alley behind the building. Lenora set her case on the bed and sat down beside it. The mattress springs creaked. She should leave, take what money she had left, get on the next eastbound train, go back to Boston, and find another position scrubbing floors or minding children. Admit this had been a stupid dream and return to the life she'd known. The sensible thing. The smart thing. But Lenora had spent 32 years being sensible, being the daughter who stayed home when her sisters married, being the sister who nursed sick brothers while other women her age went to dances, being the woman who didn't ask for anything she hadn't earned twice over. And what had it gotten her? A brother who'd drunk himself to death anyway. Sisters who stopped visiting because their husbands found her presence uncomfortable. A reputation in Boston as the spinster who'd missed her chance. She'd come to Red Hollow because Samuel Garrett's letters had promised something different. Not romance, Lenora wasn't fool enough to expect that, but respect. Partnership. A place where the work of her hands would matter more than the shape of her face. He'd lied, but the town was still here. And if there was one thing Lenora knew how to do, it was work. She stood up, washed her face in the basin, and went downstairs for supper. The dining room held 6 other boarders, 2 men who worked at the lumber mill, a widow named Mrs. Price who taught school, a quiet man nobody introduced, and 2 women who worked as seamstresses. They all looked up when Lenora entered, and she saw the recognition flash across their faces. News traveled fast. She took an empty seat at the end of the table and kept her eyes on her plate while Mrs. Hadley served watery stew and hard bread. The conversation around her continued in low murmurs, talk of weather and work and who'd been seen with whom, but nobody addressed her directly until one of the mill workers, a red-faced man with hands like hams, cleared his throat. "You're the one came in on the afternoon train." It wasn't a question. Lenora nodded. "That was some scene at the station." "I suppose it was." "Samuel Garrett's a fool," the other mill worker said. He was younger, with a scar across his cheek. "Always has been." "Ben," Mrs. Hadley's voice cut across the table, "we don't gossip at supper." "Not gossip if it's true," Ben muttered, but he shut up. The widow, Mrs. Price, had kinder eyes. "What will you do now, dear? Do you have family back east?" "Some." "Then surely you'll—" "I'm staying." The table went quiet. Even the seamstresses stopped their whispered conversation. "Staying?" Mrs. Price looked genuinely confused. "But, forgive me, dear, but what would you do here? A woman alone in Red Hollow?" "Work," Lenora said. "Same as anyone." The red-faced mill worker snorted. "Doing what? You got skills?" "I can cook, clean, mend, keep accounts, tend animals, fix fences. I can read and write and do sums. I've managed a household since I was 15. "That's housework," he said dismissively. "Not real work." Lenora set down her spoon very carefully. "You wear mended shirts, eat cooked food, and sleep in clean sheets. Someone does that work. I don't see why it's not real." Ben laughed, a short, surprised bark. "She's got you there, Frank." Frank scowled into his stew. The conversation moved on, but Lenora felt Mrs. Price watching her with an expression that might have been worry or might have been something else. After supper, as Lenora was heading back upstairs, the schoolteacher caught her in the hallway. "Miss Vale? A moment?" Lenora stopped. Mrs. Price twisted her hands together, her wedding ring catching the lamplight. "I don't mean to pry, but Red Hollow isn't an easy place for a woman without protection, without a husband or family. People here, they have certain expectations." "I noticed." "Then you understand why staying might be difficult. There are only so many positions available for women, and most are already filled. The seamstresses," she nodded toward the dining room, "they barely make ends meet. And the other sorts of work available to women alone, well," she didn't finish the sentence. She didn't need to. "I appreciate the concern," Lenora said, "but I'm not leaving." "You're very stubborn." "Yes." Mrs. Price smiled then, just a little. "Good. You'll need to be." The next morning, Lenora set out to find work. She started at the general store where Mary Chen's father, a compact Chinese man with watchful eyes, listened to her request and shook his head before she'd finished speaking. "I don't need help," he said. Not unkindly, but firmly. "Business is slow." "I could organize your stock. I noticed the dry goods are mixed with the hardware. If you separated them, customers could find things faster. Faster finding means more buying." Mr. Chen's expression didn't change. "No, thank you." The restaurant turned her away without even letting her finish. The hotel said they had enough maids. The post office said they didn't hire women for anything besides laundry, and they had a woman for that already. By noon, Lenora's feet hurt, and her jaw ached from holding her face pleasant while door after door closed. She bought bread and cheese with precious coins and ate sitting on a bench outside the courthouse, watching Red Hollow's main street flow past. It was a rough town, still raw in the way of frontier settlements that hadn't quite decided if they'd last. False front buildings lined streets that turned to mud when it rained. Men wore guns like accessories. Women walked quickly, eyes down, not lingering. The bank, Gideon Voss's bank, stood on the corner like a watchful eye, brick where everything else was wood, permanent where everything else felt temporary. She saw Samuel Garrett once crossing the street with 2 other men. He glanced her way and quickly looked elsewhere, his face reddening. She felt nothing. The betrayal had already burned through her. What remained was just ash and determination. By evening, she'd tried 14 establishments, 14 polite rejections, some more polite than others. She returned to the boarding house with sore feet and a smaller coin purse, sat through another silent supper, and climbed the stairs to her room. $3 a week. She had maybe 12 weeks before desperation made her choices for her. She was washing her face in the basin when someone knocked. Mary Chen stood in the hallway, still wearing her apron. "Can I come in?" Lenora stepped back. Mary entered and closed the door behind her, glancing around the spare room with an expression Lenora couldn't read. "I heard you were looking for work today," Mary said. "News travels fast. It's a small town. People talk." Mary sat on the edge of the bed, uninvited but not unwelcome. "Nobody's going to hire you." "I'm starting to gather that. It's not personal." "Well, it is personal, but it's not about you specifically. It's about what happened at the station. Samuel Garrett made you look foolish in front of everyone, and now you're marked. If someone hires you, they're saying they disagree with him. In a town this size, people don't like taking sides." "What about your father?" "Especially my father. We're Chinese. We can't afford to make people uncomfortable." Lenora sat down beside her, feeling the fight drain out. "So what do I do?" Mary was quiet for a moment. Then, "There's one place nobody else will tell you about. It's far from town. Difficult work. The man who owns it, people avoid him." "Why?" "Because his wife died 2 years ago, and he never recovered. Drinks too much, lets the place fall apart. He's mean when he's drunk, and drunk most days." Mary met her eyes. "But he needs help, real help. The kind nobody else wants to give." "What kind of help?" "Ranch work, cooking, cleaning, tending animals, managing accounts, everything you said you could do." She paused. "It's 5 miles outside town. You'd be alone out there with him. It's dangerous." "More dangerous than starving in 12 weeks? "Maybe. I don't know." Mary stood up. "His name is Ronan Creed. He owns the water rights to the big creek that feeds half the county. That's why Gideon Voss hates him. He wants that land, but Creed won't sell. The ranch is called Broken Creek. If you head north out of town tomorrow morning, you'll see the fence line about an hour's walk. Follow it west." "Why are you telling me this?" Mary moved toward the door, then stopped. "Because what Samuel did was cruel, and because I think you're tougher than people give you credit for." She smiled, quick and sad. "Also because if you stay in town looking for work, you're going to make my father uncomfortable every time you walk past the store." After she left, Lenora lay in bed staring at the ceiling. A failing ranch, a drunk, 5 miles from town. Dangerous. She'd spent her whole life being careful, being safe. And where had it gotten her? At dawn, she packed her case, paid Mrs. Hadley for 1 more week, and started walking north. The land outside Red Hollow opened up like a bruise, all browns and yellows, and the occasional shock of green where water touched. The fence line Mary had mentioned appeared after 40 minutes of walking, rail fencing that had once been well maintained but now sagged in places, wire hanging loose. Lenora followed it west. The sun climbed higher, turning the August morning into an oven. Sweat soaked through her dress. Her case got heavier with every step. But she kept walking. The ranch house appeared slowly, resolving out of the heat shimmer like something from a fever dream. It might have been grand once, a 2-story structure with a wide porch and a barn that could hold 20 horses. But time and neglect had worked their particular violence. Shutters hung crooked. The porch steps looked ready to collapse. The barn's roof had a hole big enough to see sky through. She stopped at the front gate, hanging on one hinge, and looked for signs of life. A dog barked somewhere. Chickens scattered across a yard gone to weeds. And from the barn came the sound of someone cursing, low and steady and creative. Lenora set down her case, straightened her dress, and walked into the yard. The cursing stopped. A man emerged from the barn, and Lenora's first thought was that he looked like he'd been broken and put back together wrong. Tall, broad-shouldered, but carrying himself like something hurt. Dark hair gone shaggy, several days of beard, eyes that might have been blue or gray in better light, but now just looked empty. He stared at her for a long moment. Then, "You lost?" "No." "Then what the hell are you doing here?" "I'm looking for work." That got a laugh, harsh and humorless. "Work. Here." He looked around at the collapsing ranch like he was seeing it for the first time. Lady, I can barely keep myself fed. I don't need... Your fence line is falling apart. Your barn roof has a hole. Your chickens are running wild because nobody's maintaining the coop, which means you're losing eggs to predators. Your porch steps are rotting, and if you're drunk when you use them, which I'm guessing you are most days, you're going to break your neck. She met his eyes. You need help. I need work. I'm very good at work. Ronan Creed looked at her like she'd sprouted a second head. Who are you? Lenora Vale. His eyes narrowed. You're the one from the train station? The one Samuel Garrett? Yes. So you came out here because... He waved a hand, inviting her to finish. Because nobody in town will hire me, and I have 12 weeks before I'm broke. This seemed like my best option. Your best option is a falling-apart ranch run by a drunk 5 miles from town? Apparently. He stared at her. She stared back. Finally, he said, I can't pay much. How much is not much? Room, board, $5 a month. It was insulting. It was also better than nothing. $10, Lenora said. I said I can't. Your barn roof needs replacing. That's skilled work. Your accounts need managing. I saw the papers stacked on your porch. That's skilled work too. Your animals need medical attention. Your fence needs mending. All of that is skilled work, Mr. Creed. I'm willing to do it for $10 a month plus room and board. That's less than you'd pay any man. His jaw worked. 7, 9, fine, 9. He rubbed his face, suddenly looking exhausted. There's a room off the kitchen. Used to be the maid's quarters. It's small. I don't need much space. I'm not good company. I'm not here for company. He nodded slowly, like he was making a decision he'd regret. All right, fine. You can start by... He stopped, seemed to lose his train of thought, then shook his head. Figure it out yourself. I'll be in the barn. He turned and walked away, his gait unsteady. Lenora picked up her case and headed for the house. The inside was worse than the outside. Dishes piled in the sink, crusted with days-old food, dust thick on every surface, papers scattered across a desk, bills, letters, legal documents all mixed together. The maid's room was tiny, but at least had a bed and a window. She set down her case, rolled up her sleeves, and got to work. 3 days in, Lenora understood why nobody else had taken this position. Ronan Creed was, as advertised, drunk most days. He'd disappear into the barn and emerge hours later reeking of whiskey, his eyes unfocused. He wasn't violent, at least not yet, but he was mean in the way of people who hate themselves and want company in the hating. He'd make cutting remarks about her cooking, her cleaning, the way she walked. Then he'd disappear again. But Lenora had grown up with brothers who drank and a father who died with a bottle in his hand. She knew the shape of this particular demon. She cleaned the house top to bottom, sorting papers as she went. The ranch's financial situation was worse than she'd expected. Ronan owed the bank, Gideon Voss's bank, nearly $3,000. The interest alone was crushing, and the payment records were a mess, some marked paid that had no receipts, others missing entirely. She found the loan documents in a drawer, water-damaged but readable. The terms were terrible. The interest rate was twice what any fair lender would charge. And there were clauses about default that would transfer the property immediately to the bank. Gideon Voss wanted this land, wanted it badly enough to loan money on terms designed to force default. Lenora sat at the desk, looking at the numbers, and felt something cold settle in her chest. This wasn't just a failing ranch. This was a trap slowly closing. She found Ronan in the barn, sitting on a hay bale with a bottle beside him. Not drunk yet, but working on it. Your loan documents are predatory, she said without preamble. He looked up, squinting like the dim barn light hurt. What? The bank loan. The terms are designed to make you fail. The interest compounds monthly, which is unusual. And there's a clause that says if you miss a single payment, the entire balance becomes due immediately. She held up the papers. Did you read this before you signed? My wife handled the finances. When did she die? 2 years ago. And when did you take out this loan? Right after. He reached for the bottle. Lenora moved it out of reach. Hey, how many payments have you missed? I don't know. 2? 3? Try 5. You're one payment away from default. And if that happens, Gideon Voss takes everything. Ronan's face went gray. That can't be right. It's right. The question is what you're going to do about it. He stared at her for a long moment. Then he laughed. That same harsh, empty sound. What am I going to do? I'm going to finish this bottle and then start another one. That's what I do, Miss Vale. I fail. Then why haven't you sold? What? If you're just going to fail anyway, why not sell? Voss would buy this place tomorrow. You'd walk away with something. His hands curled into fists. Because my wife loved this land. She built this ranch from nothing, and I'm not selling to that vulture. Then stop drinking and fight for it. The words came out harder than she'd meant them to. They hung in the air between them, sharp and unforgiving. Ronan stood up slowly. For a moment, Lenora thought he might hit her. Instead, he walked past her toward the house, moving with the careful precision of someone trying to prove they're sober. She found him an hour later in the study, bent over the loan documents, his face haggard. It's bad, he said quietly. Yes. Can we fix it? Lenora pulled up a chair. Maybe, but it means work, real work. The ranch needs to produce enough to cover the payments and start eating into the principal. That means fixing the barn so we can keep more animals, mending the fences so we don't lose stock, planting a kitchen garden, finding buyers for whatever we can sell. That's months of labor. Yes. Why would you do that? $9 a month isn't enough to... It's what I have, Lenora said simply. This job, this place, it's what I have right now. So I'm going to work it as hard as I can. He looked at her like he was trying to solve a puzzle. Samuel Garrett is an idiot. Yes, I'm not good at this, at being responsible, at staying sober. I know. Then why? Because everyone deserves a second chance, Mr. Creed, even people who don't think they do. He was quiet for a long time. Then he nodded, just once, and turned back to the papers. They worked until midnight, sorting documents, making lists, planning. It wasn't much, but it was a start. The work was brutal. Lenora rose before dawn and worked until dark, her hands raw from fence wire and hammer handles. She repaired the chicken coop, patched the barn roof, cleaned out stalls that hadn't been mucked in months. She planted a late-season garden with seeds bought on credit from Mr. Chen's store. His daughter Mary had vouched for her. Her father reluctantly agreed. Ronan helped when he was sober. He was good with his hands when they weren't shaking, good with animals when he remembered to care. But the drinking pulled at him like gravity. Some days he won the fight. Some days he didn't. 2 weeks in, Lenora was in town buying supplies when she ran into Gideon Voss. He stood outside his bank, watching her load a borrowed wagon with fence posts. His expression was pleasant, but something in it made her skin crawl. Miss Vale, working for Ronan Creed now, I hear. Yes, that's quite a change from bride-to-be to ranch hand. I'm adaptable. He smiled. I'm sure you are. Though I wonder if you understand the situation you've walked into. The Creed Ranch is on the verge of collapse. It would be kinder, really, to let it go. Kinder to whom? To everyone. Ronan could start fresh somewhere else. The land could be properly managed, resources put to better use. By you. By someone capable. He stepped closer, lowering his voice. Miss Vale, I don't know what Ronan has told you, but that ranch cannot be saved. The debt is too deep, and when it falls, and it will fall, you'll fall with it. Is $9 a month worth that? How did you know about $9 a month? His smile widened. I make it my business to know things. This is a small town. People talk. Lenora finished loading the last fence post. Thank you for your concern, Mr. Voss, but I'm quite capable of assessing my own risks. Are you? Because from where I stand, you've traded one humiliation for another. At least Samuel Garrett's rejection was quick. This will be slow, painful, and very public. She climbed onto the wagon seat and took up the reins. We'll see. His expression hardened. Yes, we will. She drove away, her hands tight on the leather, and didn't look back. That night, she told Ronan about the conversation. He listened with his jaw clenched. He's trying to scare you off, he said finally. I know. It might be smart to listen. He's not wrong about the debt. Are you telling me to leave? He looked at her, really looked, for maybe the first time since she'd arrived. No, but I'm saying you should know what you're fighting. I know exactly what I'm fighting, Lenora said, and I'm not scared of Gideon Voss. She should have been. But they... A month in, the ranch started to change. The barn roof was patched, the fences mended, the chicken coop produced twice as many eggs. Ronan sold 3 horses at fair prices, money that went straight to the bank payment. The kitchen garden yielded late vegetables that stretched their food budget. It wasn't enough. Not nearly. But it was progress. Ronan was sober more days than not. He worked alongside her, his movements becoming surer, his eyes clearer. They didn't talk much, both too tired at day's end, but a rhythm developed. An understanding. Then came the first frost, early even for Montana, and everything changed. Lenora was in the barn when she heard the horse scream. She dropped the bucket she'd been carrying and ran. One of the mares, a gray named Silver, their most valuable breeding stock, was down in her stall thrashing. Foam flecked her mouth. Her eyes rolled white. "Ronan!" Lenora scrambled over the stall door. The mare kicked, nearly catching her ribs. "Ronan!" He appeared running and went pale. "What happened?" "I don't know. I just found her like this." He knelt beside the struggling horse, his hands moving over her body with practiced efficiency. Then he stopped, his face going hard. "Poison." "What?" "Someone poisoned her. Look." He pointed to the water trough. A faint, oily sheen floated on the surface. "Someone put something in the water." Lenora's blood went cold. Who would? But she knew. They both knew. Ronan stood, his fists clenched. "Get fresh water. Force her to drink it. Make her vomit if you can. I'll be back." "Where are you going?" "To town." "Ronan, no. You can't prove..." "I know who did this." He left before she could stop him. Lenora turned back to the dying horse and got to work. It took hours. Hours of forcing water, of walking the mare to keep her moving, of praying to forces she didn't believe in. But as dawn broke, Silver was still breathing, weak but alive. Ronan came back at sunrise, his knuckles bloody. Lenora met him in the yard. "What did you do?" "Went to see Voss. He wasn't there. Found his foreman instead. Told him if anything else happens to my animals, I'll burn his boss's bank to the ground." "Ronan, I know it was stupid. But I'm tired, Lenora. Tired of being pushed. Tired of losing things." It was the first time he'd used her given name. Something about it made her chest ache. "The mare's alive," she said quietly. "That's what matters." He nodded, exhausted. Then he looked at her, really looked, his eyes clear and sober and sad. "You should leave, while you still can. This is only going to get worse." "No." "Lenora, no. I stay." "Why?" She didn't have a good answer, or maybe she had too many. Because she had nowhere else to go. Because she was too stubborn to quit. Because somewhere in the past month, this broken ranch and this broken man had become something that mattered. "Because I'm not done yet," she said finally. Ronan laughed, quiet and ragged. "You're either very brave or very foolish." "Maybe both." They stood there in the early morning light, two people who'd been rejected by different futures and made a silent pact to fight together. The war with Gideon Voss had begun, and Lenora had no intention of losing. The poisoning changed everything. Before, Gideon Voss had been a distant threat, dangerous but abstract, like bad weather on the horizon. After Silver's near death, he became something immediate, real, a problem that couldn't be solved with hard work and fence wire. Lenora spent the following week checking every water source on the property twice a day. She tasted the well water herself before giving it to the animals. She locked the feed room at night and kept the key on a cord around her neck. Ronan started sleeping in the barn with a rifle across his lap, though whether it was to protect the horses or give himself an excuse to avoid his empty house, Lenora couldn't say. The mare recovered slowly. Her legs stayed shaky for days, and she refused grain for nearly a week. But she lived, which felt like a small victory in a war they were losing by inches. Town became complicated. Lenora still went in twice a week for supplies, and each time the atmosphere grew a little colder. People who'd been merely indifferent became actively hostile. The seamstresses who'd shared Mrs. Hadley's table stopped acknowledging her on the street. The restaurant owner who'd turned her away for work now wouldn't meet her eyes at all. Even Mr. Chen, who'd at least been professionally courteous, began communicating through Mary instead of addressing Lenora directly. "They're scared," Mary explained one afternoon, keeping her voice low while her father helped another customer. "Gideon Voss has been talking, saying you're helping Ronan Creed avoid his obligations, that you're encouraging him to default so you can, I don't know, steal the ranch somehow." Lenora was selecting nails from a bin, counting them carefully because every penny mattered. "That doesn't even make sense." "It doesn't have to make sense. It just has to make people nervous." Mary glanced toward her father. "My father asked me to stop talking to you. Said it's bad for business." "Then maybe you should listen to him." "Maybe." Mary smiled, quick and defiant. "But I'm not going to." Still, Lenora noticed that their conversations grew shorter, that Mary no longer walked her to the door. Small concessions to her father's worry, to the town's shifting allegiances. On the way out of town that day, wagon loaded with supplies bought on credit they probably couldn't repay, Lenora passed the bank. Gideon Voss stood on the steps talking to 3 men, ranchers by the look of their clothes. He saw her and smiled, raising his hand in a wave that looked friendly from a distance, but felt like a threat up close. She didn't wave back. When she returned to the ranch, she found Ronan sitting on the porch steps, the ones she'd repaired 2 weeks ago, with his head in his hands. No bottle in sight, which meant whatever was wrong, he was facing it sober. "What happened?" she asked, climbing down from the wagon. He held up a piece of paper. "Notice from the bank. They're calling the loan." Lenora's stomach dropped. "They can't do that. You're current on payments." "Barely. And there's a clause, I didn't see it before, but it's there, that gives them the right to call the full amount due if they determine the property is being mismanaged or at risk of depreciation." "That's subjective. You could fight it." "With what? I can't afford a lawyer. And even if I could, Voss owns half the territorial judges." He looked up at her, and his face was the same empty mask she'd seen that first day. "It's over, Lenora. I tried. We tried. But it's done." She sat down beside him, her mind racing through options and finding nothing but dead ends. $3,000. They'd need $3,000 in 30 days or the bank would take everything. "How much do we have?" she asked. "In cash? Maybe 200. We could sell the horses, the equipment, everything not nailed down, and we might get to 800 if we're lucky. So we need 2,200 more. In a month," he laughed, bitter. "I'd have better odds robbing the bank." They sat in silence, watching the sun sink toward the mountains. Lenora's hands ached from fence work. Her back hurt from hauling water. Her shoulders burned from days of carrying feed bags. All that work, all that progress, about to be swallowed by a piece of paper and a man who wanted land more than he valued fairness. "There has to be a way," she said finally. "There isn't. There's always a way." Ronan looked at her. "You really believe that?" "I have to." He nodded slowly, like he was trying to borrow some of her certainty. "All right. Then we start by figuring out what we can sell and what we need to keep to stay operational. If we're going down, we at least go down fighting." They worked through the night, making lists by lamplight. The old plow that Ronan never used, sell it. The carriage in the barn that hadn't moved in 2 years, sell it. 3 of the horses could go, but they needed to keep at least 2 for ranch work. The good saddles, the extra harnesses, the tools they could do without. By dawn, they had a plan that might, if everything went perfectly and the market cooperated and luck smiled on them for the first time in months, raise another $600. Still impossibly short. But it was something. Lenora was washing her face in the kitchen basin, so tired she could barely stand, when Ronan spoke from the doorway. "Why are you doing this?" She didn't turn around. "We've had this conversation." "No, I mean, really. You could leave today. Find work somewhere else. This isn't your debt, isn't your fight. Why stay for a battle you'll probably lose?" Lenora dried her face on a towel that needed washing and turned to face him. He looked exhausted, too, shadows under his eyes, grief and determination fighting for space on his features. "Because I'm tired of losing," she said. "I lost my chance at marriage, lost my reputation, lost whatever future I thought I had coming here. I'm not losing this, too." "This isn't yours to lose." "Isn't it? I've put 6 weeks of my life into this place. 6 weeks of blood and sweat and hope. That makes it partly mine, whether you want it to be or not. He studied her face like he was seeing her for the first time. You're a strange woman, Lenora Vale. Yes. I'm glad you're here. Yes. Something passed between them then. Not romance, nothing so simple, but recognition. Two people who'd been broken by different failures, choosing to stand together rather than fall apart separately. Get some sleep, Ronan said. We've got a long fight ahead. The auction started 2 days later. They set up in front of the courthouse, displaying everything they could spare on blankets and tables borrowed from the general store. Ronan had shaved and put on clean clothes. Lenora wore her best dress, not fancy, but respectable. They needed to look like people worth doing business with. The turnout was smaller than they'd hoped. A few ranchers came to look at the horses. Several women examined the saddles. But most people walked past without stopping, their eyes sliding away when Lenora tried to catch them. The invisible hand of Gideon Voss, she thought, pushing people away without him even being present. Except he was present. He showed up an hour into the auction, standing across the street in front of his bank, watching. Not buying, not bidding, just watching. Making sure everyone knew he was watching. By noon, they'd sold one horse for less than it was worth, 2 saddles, and the plow. $420 total. Lenora counted the money 3 times, her hands shaking slightly, and tried not to feel the weight of failure pressing down. It's not enough, Ronan said quietly, stating the obvious. No. A woman approached then, Mrs. Hadley from the boarding house. She examined a set of harnesses with the same critical eye she'd used on Lenora that first day. These are good quality, she said. Yes, ma'am. I don't need harnesses. She set them down and looked directly at Lenora. But I heard you're in a difficult position. Lenora kept her face neutral. We're managing. No, you're not. The whole town knows Voss called your loan. Mrs. Hadley's voice was flat, matter of fact. They also know he's been poisoning opinion against you, making sure nobody helps. Then why are you here? Because I don't like bullies. Never have. She pulled out a small cloth purse and counted out $20. For the harnesses, which I don't need, but I'll take anyway. It wasn't much, but the gesture felt larger than the money. Thank you, Lenora said. Mrs. Hadley nodded and left without another word. Across the street, Gideon Voss had stopped watching. He'd turned to speak with someone, a deputy, by the look of his badge. They talked for several minutes, the deputy nodding, before Voss went back into his bank. The auction dragged on into the afternoon. They sold a few more items. The carriage went to a rancher from 2 towns over who didn't know or care about local politics. By the time they packed up the remaining unsold goods, the sun was setting and they had $670, $2,300 short. They loaded the wagon in silence. Lenora's feet hurt. Her head ached. She wanted to cry but wouldn't give the town the satisfaction. We'll find another way, Ronan said, but his voice lacked conviction. They were halfway back to the ranch when they saw the smoke. At first, Lenora thought it was a trick of the sunset, orange and red painting the horizon, but Ronan went rigid beside her, his hands tightening on the reins. That's coming from our property, he said. He snapped the reins hard. The horses lurched forward into a gallop, the wagon rattling dangerously over the rough road. Lenora grabbed the seat to keep from being thrown, her heart hammering. The smoke grew thicker as they approached. And then she saw it. The barn. The beautiful barn they'd spent weeks repairing, belching black smoke into the darkening sky. Flames licked through the roof hole they'd patched, making it bigger, hungrier. The horses screamed inside. Ronan didn't even stop the wagon properly. He jumped down while it was still moving and ran toward the burning building. Lenora scrambled after him, shouting his name. The horses, he yelled back. We have to get them out. The heat hit her like a wall when she got close. Smoke burned her eyes and throat. She could hear the animals inside, panicking, throwing themselves against their stalls. Ronan kicked open this barn door. Smoke poured out, thick and black. He disappeared into it without hesitation. Lenora stood frozen for one horrible second, watching the flames spread across the roof. Then she grabbed a bucket from the well, soaked her shawl, tied it across her mouth and nose, and ran in after him. The interior was chaos. Fire crawled up the walls, burning hay scattered across the floor. The horses, 5 of them, trapped in their stalls, kicked and screamed. Ronan was already struggling with the first stall door, his hands fumbling with the latch. Get that one, he shouted, pointing to the stall on the opposite side. Lenora ran. The heat was incredible. Her eyes streamed. The smoke made breathing impossible, each inhale like swallowing hot sand. She reached the stall and yanked at the latch. It was stuck, warped from heat or age or both. The horse inside, the gray mare, Silver, the one they'd saved from poisoning, threw herself against the door. The wood cracked, but held. Come on, Lenora muttered, pulling harder. The latch finally gave. She hauled the door open and jumped aside as Silver bolted past, her mane singed, heading for the exit. A beam fell from the ceiling, crashing down between Lenora and Ronan. Sparks showered everywhere. Part of the roof collapsed, opening the building to the night sky, but also feeding the fire with fresh air. The flames roared higher. Get out, Ronan shouted. He'd freed 2 more horses and was working on a third. Get out now. Not without you. She fought her way around the fallen beam. The heat scorched her skin. Her shawl was smoking. She reached the next stall and forced the latch open with hands that were starting to blister. The horse, a young gelding they called Runner, burst out and fled. That left 1 more. The big bay in the corner stall, the one Ronan loved most because it had belonged to his wife. Ronan reached it first. The door was jammed, twisted by fire and heat. He threw his weight against it once, twice. Nothing. The horse inside screamed, a sound Lenora would hear in nightmares for years. Help me! Ronan's voice was ragged. Together they slammed into the door. The wood groaned. 1 more hit and the latch splintered. The bay charged out, its coat smoking, and galloped for freedom. Now go! Ronan grabbed Lenora's arm and pulled her toward the exit. They were 10 feet from the door when the rest of the roof came down. Lenora heard it first, a terrible groaning, like the building itself was dying. She looked up and saw the main support beam starting to give way, burning through where it connected to the wall. She shoved Ronan hard. He stumbled forward, through the doorway, into the open air. The beam fell where he'd been standing, bringing half the roof with it in an explosion of sparks and burning wood. Lenora tried to follow, but another beam fell across her path, trapping her inside a cage of fire. She heard Ronan screaming her name, saw him try to come back in and 2 neighbors, when had they arrived, grabbing him, holding him back. The smoke was too thick to see through now, the heat unbearable. Lenora dropped to her knees trying to find air near the floor and felt her way along the wall. Her hands touched hot wood and jerked back. Everything was burning. Everything. There had to be another way out. There had to be. Her searching hands found a gap in the wall, a board missing or burned through. She pulled at the edges, ignoring the pain as splinters drove into her palms. The gap widened. She squeezed through, wood scraping her shoulders, catching her dress. And then she was out, falling onto the dirt outside the barn, gulping air that tasted like ash and salvation. Hands grabbed her, pulling her further from the building. Ronan's face appeared above her, streaked with soot, his eyes wild. You stupid, brave, impossible woman, he said, and she couldn't tell if he was angry or relieved or both. Behind him, the barn collapsed completely, folding in on itself like a dying star. They watched it burn, along with a dozen neighbors who'd come running when they saw the smoke. Nobody tried to save the structure. It was too far gone. They focused on keeping the fire from spreading to the house and corrals. It took hours to contain. By the time the flames finally died, leaving only smoldering ruins, Lenora was sitting on the porch steps with her hands wrapped in bandages someone had provided. Burns on her palms, burns on her arms, her dress ruined, her hair singed short on one side, but alive. They were both alive. And somehow, impossibly, all 5 horses had made it out. The neighbors began to leave as dawn approached, offering quiet words of sympathy. One woman, a rancher's wife named Martha Collins, pressed a jar of salve into Lenora's bandaged hands. For the burns, she said, and for what it's worth, what you did tonight was either the bravest or most foolish thing I've ever seen. Probably both, Lenora managed. Martha almost smiled. My husband and I, we've had our own troubles with Gideon Voss. Different kind, but troubles all the same. He's not a good man. She glanced at the smoking ruins. This wasn't an accident, was it? No. Can you prove it? No. Martha nodded like she'd expected that answer. Well, good luck to you both. She left, joining her husband by their wagon. When everyone was gone, Ronan sat down beside Lenora on the steps. They sat in silence, watching smoke rise from what used to be their barn. The sun came up, turning the destruction golden and terrible. "I'm sorry," Ronan said finally. "For what?" "For bringing you into this. For letting you stay. For—" His voice cracked. "You could have died tonight. So could you." "My life isn't worth much." Lenora turned to look at him, this broken man who'd somehow become important to her in 6 weeks. "That's not true." "Isn't it? I'm a drunk who let his ranch fall apart, who let his wife's dream die, who can't even protect the people trying to help him." "You ran into a burning building to save horses. That's not nothing." "You ran in after me." "Yes." "Why?" Lenora was quiet for a long moment, watching the sunrise. Her hands throbbed, her lungs ached. Everything hurt. But underneath the pain was something else, something stubborn and fierce that refused to break. "Because we're in this together," she said, "for better or worse, and I don't abandon partners." Ronan's breath hitched. "I haven't been a good partner." "No, but you're trying to be. That's enough." They sat until the sun was fully up, two damaged people sharing damaged silence. Then Ronan stood, wincing at his own burns and bruises, and held out his hand. "Come on, let's see what we can salvage." The answer was, not much. The barn was a total loss. The equipment stored inside, plows, harnesses, tools they'd planned to sell, all destroyed. The hay for winter, gone. The feed storage, ruined. They spent the day sorting through ash and twisted metal, finding almost nothing worth saving. The horses grazed in the corral, skittish but alive. Silver had a burned patch on her flank that would scar. Runner wouldn't stop trembling, but they'd survived, which felt like the only victory available. By afternoon, Mary Chen showed up with a basket of food and medicine. "My father doesn't know I'm here," she said, unpacking bread and cheese and more bandage material. "But I figured you'd need supplies." "Thank you," Lenora said. "Tell your father we'll pay him back." "He's not expecting payment." Mary examined Lenora's bandaged hands. "How bad?" "Bad enough? Can you still work?" "I'll manage." Mary rewrapped the bandages with practiced efficiency. "There's talk in town. About the fire. Some people are saying it's suspicious. Others are saying the barn was old, bound to happen eventually." "What's Gideon Voss saying?" Ronan asked. "Nothing, which is almost worse. He's been very quiet, very—" She searched for the word. "Satisfied." Ronan's jaw clenched. Lenora put a hand on his arm, her bandaged hand, which hurt, but she did it anyway. "We can't prove anything," she said. "I know." After Mary left, they sat on the porch again, eating bread they could barely taste. The ruins of the barn smoldered in the evening light. Everything they'd built over 6 weeks, destroyed in one night. "We're finished," Ronan said. "Even if we had the money for the loan, we'd need to rebuild. Buy new equipment. Replace the feed. That's thousands more we don't have." Lenora knew he was right. The math was brutal and unforgiving, but something in her refused to accept it. "There has to be something we're missing," she said. "Some option we haven't considered." "Like what?" "I don't know, but I'm not giving up." "Lenora." "I'm not giving up, Ronan. I can't. If I give up on this, what do I have left?" Her voice went hard. "I came to this territory with nothing but hope and a lying man's promises. I've lost everything twice over. This ranch, this fight, it's all I have. And I'm not handing it to Gideon Voss just because he's willing to burn us out." Ronan stared at her, something shifting in his expression. "You're terrifying when you're determined." "Good." They were quiet for a while. Then Ronan said, "There might be one thing." "What?" "The water rights. That's what Voss really wants. Not the land, not the ranch, the creek. It feeds into the main river system. Whoever controls it controls irrigation for half the county. My wife fought for years to secure those rights, and she won. The deeds filed with the territorial government. So if we could prove those rights are valuable enough, if we could show that other ranchers would pay for access, we might be able to leverage them, use them as collateral for a different loan, or sell partial access rights, or—" He trailed off. "It's a long shot, and it would take time we don't have." But Lenora's mind was already racing. Who would need creek access? The ranchers to the east. They've been struggling with drought for 2 seasons, but they're not exactly friendly with me. They don't have to be friendly. They just have to be desperate enough to pay. Ronan looked at her like she'd grown a second head. You want to negotiate water access rights with a burned ranch, no barn, and a bank foreclosure hanging over our heads? Yes. That's insane. Probably, but it's better than surrender. He laughed then, surprised and genuine. You really are the stubbornest woman I've ever met. Yes. All right, fine. We'll try. But Lenora, if this doesn't work, it has to work. The next 3 weeks were the hardest of Lenora's life. They started by making a list of every rancher within 20 miles who might benefit from creek access. Ronan knew most of them, had done business with their fathers or grandfathers before grief had turned him into a recluse. They spent days riding out to neighboring properties, Lenora's burned hands making the rains agony, pitching a plan that sounded absurd even to her own ears. Most ranchers turned them down flat. Some were polite about it. Others laughed in their faces. One old man with a face like carved wood listened to the whole pitch and then said, I don't do business with people Gideon Voss has marked. We're not marked, Lenore protested. Aren't you? Your barn burned down the same week you crossed him. That's not a coincidence, girl. That's a message. They kept trying, because what else could they do? Between meetings, they tried to hold the ranch together. Lenora cooked with bandaged hands that cracked and bled. Ronan repaired fences and tended animals, his own burns making every movement painful. They slept in shifts, afraid Voss might try something else. The house creaked at night with unfamiliar sounds that sent them both reaching for weapons. The loan deadline crept closer. 2 weeks left. Then 10 days. Then 1 week. They'd managed to sell access rights to 2 ranchers. Not for much. Barely $300 total. Combined with the auction money, they had just over $1,000. Still impossibly short. Lenora sat at the kitchen table 5 days before the deadline, her bandaged hands resting on the loan documents, and tried to find an answer in numbers that wouldn't cooperate. Ronan stood by the window, watching the road like he expected Voss's men to arrive any moment. We're not going to make it, he said quietly. We still have 5 days. And we still need $2,200. Lenora, it's over. We tried. We fought harder than anyone could have expected. But sometimes fighting isn't enough. She looked up at him, this man who'd slowly transformed from a drunk into a partner, and felt something break inside her chest. Not her will, that was still intact, stubborn to the end. But her hope, her certainty that hard work would be rewarded, that determination could overcome any obstacle. Maybe Gideon Voss was right. Maybe the ranch couldn't be saved. So what do we do? She asked. We negotiate the best terms we can for the property transfer. Try to make sure Voss pays fair value. Walk away with something. And then what? He turned from the window. I don't know. I honestly don't know. Lenora stood, her chair scraping loudly in the quiet kitchen. I need to walk. Think. I'll be back before dark. She left before he could respond, stepping out into the October afternoon. The air had turned cold, promising winter. The ranch looked different now without the barn. Incomplete, like a body missing a limb. But the fences still stood. The animals still grazed. The creek still flowed, indifferent to human struggles. She walked toward it, following the water as it wound through their property. This creek, this strip of water barely 3 feet wide in places, was worth enough to destroy lives over. The absurdity of it should have been funny. Instead, it made her angry. She was so lost in thought that she almost didn't notice the rider approaching. But the horse's hoofbeats brought her back, and she looked up to see Gideon Voss himself, sitting astride a beautiful black gelding, watching her with that same satisfied smile, her hands curled into fists, pulling at her healing burns. Miss Vale, he said pleasantly, taking in the property while you still can. What do you want? Just to extend an offer, a generous one, I think. He dismounted smoothly and stood beside his horse, every inch the successful businessman. I'm willing to pay Mr. Creed $500 for the ranch, in addition to forgiving the loan, of course. The land alone is worth 10 times that. Is it? A burned-out ranch with failed crops and mounting debts? He shook his head. I'm being charitable, Miss Vale. In 5 days I take the property and Mr. Creed gets nothing. This way, at least he walks away with something to start over. You burned our barn. His expression didn't change. That's a serious accusation. Do you have proof? You poisoned our horse. Again, proof would be helpful. Without it, you're just making yourself sound desperate. He stepped closer. Miss Vale, I want you to understand something. I don't enjoy this. I'm not cruel for cruelty's sake. But business is business. This land has resources I need. Resources that are being wasted on a drunk and on you. I have a name. Yes, and soon you'll have nothing else, unless you convince Mr. Creed to take my offer. His smile widened. Think about it. $500. Enough to start fresh somewhere else. Somewhere people don't know about Samuel Garrett's rejection, or the barn fire, or any of this unpleasantness. You could disappear, Miss Vale. Begin again. I don't want to disappear. No? What do you want then? The question caught her off guard. What did she want? To win, obviously. To save the ranch. To prove that she was worth more than Samuel Garrett's disgust or this town's dismissal. But underneath all that, something simpler and harder to name. She wanted to belong somewhere. To matter to someone. To build something that would last. I want you to leave us alone, she said finally. Gideon laughed, genuine and delighted. Oh, Miss Vale, if only the world worked that way. He mounted his horse with practiced ease. 5 days. My offer stands until then. After that, the terms become considerably less favorable. He rode away, leaving Lenora standing by the creek with her fists clenched and her heart hammering. She stayed there until the sun started to set, watching the water flow and trying to find answers that wouldn't come. Then she walked back to the house, where Ronan waited on the porch. Voss was here, she said. I know, I saw him ride up. What did he want? She told him about the offer, $500 and forgiveness of the debt in exchange for the ranch. Ronan listened without expression, his face gone carefully blank. When she finished, he said, Maybe we should take it. What? It's more than we'll get if the bank forecloses, and it's enough for both of us to start over somewhere else. You can't be serious. Lenora, we've fought, we've tried everything. Maybe it's time to accept that some battles can't be won. She wanted to argue, to tell him he was wrong, that they could still find a way. But standing there in the fading light, looking at the exhaustion etched into his features, she couldn't find the words. Maybe he was right. Maybe some battles really couldn't be won. Think about it, Ronan said quietly. We have 5 days. Let's at least consider the possibility that walking away is the smart choice. Lenora nodded, not trusting her voice, and went inside to make supper neither of them would eat. That night, she lay in her small room off the kitchen and stared at the ceiling, listening to the house settle around her. Somewhere outside, a coyote howled. The wind picked up, rattling the windows. She thought about Boston, about her sister's houses where she'd never quite fit, about the washing she'd taken in, the floors she'd scrubbed, the years spent waiting for a life that never arrived. She'd come to Red Hollow hoping for something different, something better. Instead, she'd found a different kind of failure. But at least this failure she'd chosen. At least she'd fought for it. That had to count for something, didn't it? Sleep wouldn't come. Lenora lay in the darkness, counting her heartbeats, listening to the wind rattle the window frame she'd repaired 3 weeks ago. The house creaked and settled, each sound making her wonder if someone was out there, if Gideon Voss had sent men to finish what the barn fire had started. Around 2 a.m, she gave up. She wrapped a shawl around her shoulders and padded barefoot into the kitchen. The stove had gone cold hours ago, but she didn't bother relighting it. She sat at the table in the dark, her bandaged hands resting on the worn wood, and tried to imagine walking away. $500. Split between them, that was $250 each. Enough to get somewhere new, start over, become someone else's problem instead of Red Hollow's entertainment. The thought made her stomach turn. She was still sitting there when Ronan came in, carrying a lamp. He stopped when he saw her, surprise crossing his face. Couldn't sleep either, he asked. No. He set the lamp on the table and sat down across from her. In the warm light, she could see the toll the past weeks had taken, the new lines around his eyes, the gray threading through his dark hair that hadn't been there before. He looked older, worn down, but his eyes were clear, sober. I've been thinking, he said. So have I. About Voss's offer. Among other things. Lenora traced a pattern on the table with one finger. I keep trying to figure out when I became this person. The one who fights losing battles. The one who won't quit even when quitting makes sense. You've always been this person. You just didn't have a reason to show it before. Maybe. She looked up at him. What were you thinking about? Ronan was quiet for a long moment. Then he said, I was thinking about my wife, Catherine. She died in this house, in the bedroom upstairs. Fever took her in 3 days, and there wasn't a damn thing I could do about it. Lenora waited. He'd never talked about his wife before, not really. Just mentioned her in passing, quick references that shut down before they could become conversations. She built this ranch from nothing, Ronan continued, his voice rough. Her father left her some money when he died, and she used it to buy this land when everyone said it was worthless. Spent 5 years fighting with the territorial government over water rights. Broke horses herself because we couldn't afford to hire help. She was stronger than me, smarter, better. I doubt that. It's true. And when she died, I couldn't. His hands clenched on the table. I couldn't stand being here without her. Everything reminded me of what I'd lost, so I tried to forget. Drank until I couldn't remember her face. Let the ranch fall apart because keeping it alive hurt too much. But you're sober now. Because of you. He met her eyes. You came here and started fixing things. Not because you loved this place or had any reason to care, just because it needed fixing and you needed work. And watching you fight for something that wasn't even yours made me realize I'd given up on everything Catherine built. Everything she fought for. Lenora's throat tightened. Ronan, let me finish. Please. He took a breath. I was thinking about what Catherine would say if she could see me now. About the debt, the fire, all of it. And I realized she'd tell me to fight. She'd say that $500 is an insult. That Gideon Voss is a coward who hides behind money and legal papers because he's too weak to build anything himself. She'd tell me to stop feeling sorry for myself and do something. What can we do? We're out of time and options. I don't know. But I know we can't take Voss's offer. I can't. Not after everything you've sacrificed trying to save this place. His voice dropped. Not after you ran into a burning building for horses that aren't even yours. They're ours, Lenora said. Everything here is ours. That's the problem. They sat in the lamplight, the weight of the coming deadline pressing down on them like physical force. 4 days left. 96 hours to find money they didn't have, leverage they couldn't create, or a miracle they didn't believe in. Lenora's hands throbbed under their bandages. She unwrapped them slowly, knowing she should leave them covered but needing to see the damage. The burns were healing, but ugly, red and blistered, the skin tight and angry. Ronan reached across the table and took her hands in his, gentle, despite his own roughness. These are going to scar. I know. I'm sorry. Don't be. I'd do it again. She meant it. Even knowing how it would end, she'd still run into that barn, still pull him to safety, because that's who she'd become in 8 weeks. Someone who fought instead of fled. Someone who mattered to at least one other person. Ronan's thumbs traced careful patterns on her palms, avoiding the worst of the burns. Lenora, I need to tell you something. What? He looked at her, really looked, the way he had the night of the fire, like he was trying to memorize her features. You're not what Samuel Garrett deserved. You're better. And I know I'm just a drunk rancher who's drowning in debt, but I want you to know that being around you these past weeks has been... He stopped, searching for words. It's been the first time since Catherine died that I've felt like maybe I could be a person worth being again. Lenora's eyes burned. Don't say things like that when we're about to lose everything. When else am I supposed to say them? Fair point. She laughed, watery and broken. You're terrible at timing. Always have been. He smiled, small and sad. But I mean it. Whatever happens in 4 days, I'm glad you stayed. Glad you fought with me. Even if we lose. We haven't lost yet. No, not yet. They stayed there until the lamp oil ran low and the first gray light of dawn crept through the windows. Then Ronan stood, wincing at his stiff joints, and started making coffee. Lenora rewrapped her hands and began pulling together breakfast from their dwindling supplies. They moved around each other in the kitchen with the easy familiarity of people who'd learned each other's rhythms through shared work and shared crisis. By the time the sun was fully up, they'd made a plan. Not a good plan. Not one with any real chance of success. But a plan nonetheless. They would spend the next 3 days visiting every rancher they hadn't already approached. They'd offer water access at rates so low it bordered on charity. They'd beg if they had to, promise anything, sell whatever dignity remained. And if that didn't work, if they still came up short, they'd face the foreclosure with their heads up and their conscience clear. It wasn't much, but it was better than surrender. The first ranch they visited belonged to a widow named Eleanor Pratt, whose husband had died 2 winters back, leaving her with 3 children and a dying herd. She listened to their pitch with tired eyes and a face that had forgotten how to hope. "How much?" she asked when Lenora finished. $20 for seasonal access. You can water your herd twice a week through summer." Eleanor calculated silently, her lips moving. "I don't have $20. "Then pay what you can. 10, 5, whatever helps." "Why would you do that? Everyone knows you need money." "Because we're not Gideon Voss," Ronan said, "and because your herd dying doesn't help anyone." Eleanor studied them both for a long moment. Then she went inside and came back with a cloth purse. She counted out $12 in coins and small bills, her hands shaking slightly. "It's all I can spare," she said. "The children need winter clothes." Lenora took the money with something close to reverence. "This helps, more than you know. Is it true what people are saying, that Voss burned your barn? We can't prove it. But you believe it." "Yes." Eleanor's mouth compressed into a thin line. "He foreclosed on my husband's brother 3 years ago. Took the land for half what it was worth. My husband tried to fight it, but..." She trailed off. "There's a lot of people in this county who've been hurt by Gideon Voss. But nobody talks about it because he owns the bank, owns half the businesses, can make life difficult for anyone who crosses him." "We're aware," Ronan said dryly. After they left, adding Eleanor's $12 to their growing total, Lenora said, "She's right, you know, about people being hurt. I've seen it in town, the way folks look when Voss's name comes up, like they're remembering something painful. Fear keeps people quiet. Maybe. Or maybe they just need someone to go first." The next 2 days blurred together in a haze of dusty roads and desperate negotiations. They visited 16 ranches. 11 turned them away. 4 paid for water access at rates that barely covered the paperwork. One old rancher named Jacob Moss listened to the whole pitch, then said, "I'll give you $50 for permanent access." Lenora nearly fell off her horse. "50? My herd's been dying for 2 seasons because I don't have reliable water. Your creek could save them. $50 is a bargain, and we both know it." He counted out the money with gnarled hands. "I heard what Voss did to you, heard about the barn. He tried the same thing to me 5 years back, but I was too stubborn to break. Guess that runs in the family." By the end of the 3rd day, they had just over $1,800. Still short by $1,400, but closer than they'd been. Close enough to taste the possibility of survival. They rode back to the ranch in the late afternoon, both too exhausted to talk. The house came into view, solid and familiar. The burned barn ruins had stopped smoking, leaving just charred wood and broken dreams. But the corrals still stood. The creek still flowed. The animals still grazed. They could survive this. They had to. Lenora was unsaddling her horse when she noticed the paper nailed to the porch post. Her stomach dropped. Ronan saw it too. He dismounted and walked over, his movements slow. He pulled the notice down and read it, his face going gray. "What is it?" Lenora asked, though she already knew. "Legal notice. The bank is accelerating the foreclosure. They want full payment by tomorrow at noon, not in 4 days." "They can't do that." "They can. There's a clause, of course there's a clause, that allows them to accelerate if they determine the property is at risk of further damage or depreciation. The barn fire qualifies." Lenora felt the world tilt. Tomorrow. They had until tomorrow to find $1,400. Impossible. It was impossible. "This is Voss," she said, her voice shaking with fury. "He knew we were close. Someone must have told him about the water rights payments, so he moved up the deadline." "Probably." Ronan crumpled the notice in his fist. "And there's nothing we can do about it." "Yes, there is. We go to him tonight, offer him partial payment, negotiate an extension. He won't agree. Then we make him agree." Ronan looked at her like she'd lost her mind. "How exactly do you plan to do that?" "I don't know, but I'm not letting him win because he changed the rules." They rode into town as the sun set, pushing their tired horses harder than they should have. Red Hollow's main street was nearly empty, most people already home for supper. The bank stood dark and closed, but light showed in the upstairs windows where Gideon Voss kept his private offices. Lenora tied her horse to the rail and walked up to the bank's front door. Locked. She pounded on it hard enough to hurt her healing hands. "Voss, I know you're up there. Come down." Nothing. She pounded again. A window opened above. Gideon leaned out, his expression amused. "Miss Vale, how can I help you at this late hour?" "You moved up the foreclosure date." "I exercised a legal right outlined in the loan documents. Surely you don't object to following the law." "The law?" Lenore's voice cracked. "You burned our barn, poisoned our horse, and now you're hiding behind legal papers? That's not law. That's cowardice." His amusement faded. "Be very careful what you accuse me of, Miss Vale. Slander has consequences. So does arson. So does attempted murder. Or does that only matter when it's not you doing it?" "I don't know what you're talking about." "Yes, you do. And so does everyone else in this town, even if they're too scared to say it." "Lenora," Ronan said quietly, touching her arm, "this isn't helping." She shook him off. "We have $1,800. We can pay that tomorrow and the rest within 2 weeks. That's a reasonable offer." "Reasonable to whom?" Voss leaned on the windowsill, perfectly calm. "The loan documents don't allow for partial payments once foreclosure proceedings begin. You know this because you've read them. So either you pay the full amount tomorrow at noon, or the property transfers to the bank. Those are your options. Then extend the deadline. Give us 2 more weeks." "Why would I do that?" "Because it's the right thing to do." Voss laughed, genuine and delighted. "Miss Vale, I appreciate your passion, I really do. But business isn't about right and wrong. It's about assets and liabilities, and your ranch is a liability I'm ready to acquire." "The water rights alone are worth more than the loan," Lenora shot back. "You're stealing from us." "I'm exercising legal remedies for a defaulted loan. If you have a problem with that, take it up with a judge." His smile widened. "Oh, wait. You can't afford a lawyer, can you? Funny how that works." Ronan stepped forward, his hand dropping to where a gun would normally hang. He wasn't wearing one, but the gesture was clear. "You're going to regret this." "Is that a threat, Mr. Creed?" "It's a promise." "Interesting, making threats against a banker in front of witnesses." Voss gestured to the street, where several people had stopped to watch. "Deputy Wilson, did you hear that?" A man stepped out of the shadows. The same deputy Lenora had seen Voss talking to during the auction. He looked uncomfortable but dutiful. "I heard it," he said reluctantly. "Excellent. Mr. Creed, I suggest you and your companion leave before this situation escalates further." Voss's voice went hard. "You have until noon tomorrow. After that, every minute you remain on my property will be trespassing. Good evening." He closed the window. The light in his office went out. Lenora stood in the street, shaking with rage and helplessness. The deputy watched them with wary eyes. The bystanders whispered among themselves, their voices carrying in the quiet evening. Ronan took her arm, gentle but firm. "Come on, there's nothing more we can do here." They rode back in darkness, the horses picking their way carefully along the rutted road. Lenora's mind raced through increasingly desperate plans. They could steal the money. They could burn Voss's bank the way he'd burned their barn. They could run, take what they had, and disappear into the territory. All stupid ideas, all born of panic and fury. By the time they reached the ranch, her rage had cooled into something heavier. Despair, maybe, or just exhaustion. They tended the horses in silence, then went inside. The house felt different now, temporary, like a place they were borrowing rather than building. Lenora made coffee because she needed something to do with her hands. Ronan sat at the table staring at nothing. "We could leave tonight," he said finally. "Take the 1800 and go. Start over somewhere Voss can't reach us." "Is that what you want?" "I don't know what I want anymore." He rubbed his face. "I'm tired, Lenora, tired of fighting, tired of losing." "Then why keep going?" "Because you won't let me quit." He looked at her, his eyes raw. "Because somehow, in 2 months, you made me care again, about the ranch, about the future, about—" He stopped. "About things I thought I'd buried with Catherine." Lenora's heart clenched. "Ronan, I'm in love with you." The words dropped into the quiet kitchen like stones into still water. Lenora froze, her hand halfway to the coffee pot. "You can't be," she said. "Why not?" Because we're about to lose everything. Because your wife died 2 years ago. Because I'm... She gestured at herself, at her plain face and scarred hands and complete lack of conventional beauty. I'm not someone people fall in love with. That's the stupidest thing I've ever heard. Ronan stood, crossing to where she stood by the stove. You're brave and stubborn and the hardest worker I've ever met. You ran into a burning building to save my horses. You fought for this ranch like it was yours from the first day. You made me want to be sober, to be better, to be someone worth standing beside. He took her bandaged hands carefully in his. So yes, I'm in love with you. And terrible timing or not, I needed to say it before we lose tomorrow. Lenora's eyes burned. We can't lose. I won't let us. Sometimes wanting something isn't enough. It has to be. Her voice broke. Because if we lose this, if Voss takes the ranch, then what was the point? What were all those weeks of work for? The barn fire, the burns, the... She stopped, because if she kept talking, she'd start crying, and she'd promised herself she wouldn't cry in front of anyone ever again after that first day on the train platform. Ronan pulled her into his arms, and she let him. Let herself lean against his solid warmth and feel the steady beat of his heart. They stood there for a long time, two broken people holding each other up in a kitchen that might not be theirs by tomorrow. I love you too, Lenora whispered against his shirt. I didn't want to. It seemed like the worst possible time to develop feelings, but I do. I love you, and I'm terrified we're about to lose everything that matters. He kissed the top of her head, gentle and careful. Then we'll lose it together. That night, Lenora lay in her small room and stared at the ceiling, listening to Ronan move around upstairs. Tomorrow at noon, everything would end. The ranch would become Gideon Voss's property. They'd have to pack what little they owned and leave. Become exactly what Red Hollow had expected them to be from the start. Failures. The unfairness of it burned in her chest like acid. She must have slept eventually because she woke to the sound of breaking glass. Lenora was on her feet before she was fully conscious, her heart hammering. Smoke. She smelled smoke again. No, not again. She ran out of her room and straight into Ronan, who was coming down the stairs with his rifle. The house, he said. They're burning the house. Through the kitchen window, Lenora saw flames licking up the side of the building. Not the barn this time. The house. Their home. Rage flooded through her, hot and clarifying. She grabbed a blanket from the couch and ran outside. 3 men stood in the yard, their faces covered with bandanas. One held a torch. The others had guns. When they saw Lenora and Ronan, they raised their weapons. Get back inside, one of them said, his voice muffled. Like hell. Lenora beat at the flames with her blanket, ignoring the men, ignoring the guns. The fire hadn't caught well yet. The wood was too damp from recent rain. She could stop it. She had to. I said get back! A shot rang out. The bullet kicked up dirt 3 feet from where Lenora stood. She kept beating at the flames. Ronan fired his rifle into the air. Next person who points a gun at her gets it in the chest. The 3 men shifted nervously. They hadn't expected resistance. Probably thought they'd light the fire and run, same as the barn. We're just following orders, the one with the torch said. Whose orders? Ronan demanded. No answer. Gideon Voss sent you. We all know it. So you can go back and tell him that burning us out won't work. We'll rebuild. We'll keep fighting. And eventually, he'll make a mistake. And when he does, I'll make sure everyone knows what he's done. You'll be dead before that happens, one of the other men said. But he sounded uncertain now. Lenora had gotten the fire mostly out. Just a few stubborn patches still burning, smoke rising into the night sky. She turned to face the men, her blanket still clutched in her burned hands. You should leave, she said. Her voice was steady, cold. Because I'm not afraid of you. I'm not afraid of Voss. And I'm not leaving my home. The men looked at each other. The one with the torch dropped it and stepped on it. This is your last warning. Tomorrow at noon, you're done. Be smart and leave peacefully. They mounted horses Lenora hadn't noticed in the shadows and rode away, taking their cowardice with them. As soon as they were gone, Lenora's legs gave out. She sat down hard in the dirt, shaking. Ronan knelt beside her, setting down his rifle. You all right? No, not remotely. She looked at the scorched side of the house. at the damage that could have been so much worse. He's not going to stop. Even if we somehow found the money, even if we paid the loan, he'd just find another way to take it. I know. So what do we do? Ronan was quiet for a long time. Then he said, "We make sure everyone knows. If Voss is going to steal our land, he does it in front of the whole town. No more shadows. No more deniability. We make him own it." How? The foreclosure is at noon tomorrow, at the bank. That's a public proceeding. Voss will be there, probably with the territorial marshal to make it official. We show up with everyone we've sold water rights to, all the people who've been hurt by Voss over the years. We bring witnesses. We bring evidence. And even if we can't stop him from taking the ranch, we make damn sure it costs him something. It wasn't a solution. It wasn't even close. But it was a plan, and right now that was more than they'd had. They spent the rest of the night putting out the last of the flames and preparing. Ronan wrote letters to every rancher who'd bought water access, asking them to come to town tomorrow as witnesses. Lenora gathered every piece of evidence she could find: loan documents, payment records, receipts for supplies destroyed in the barn fire. They worked until dawn, fueled by coffee and stubbornness. When the sun finally rose, painting the ranch in golden light, Lenora stood in the yard and looked at everything they'd built. The repaired fences, the cleaned corrals, the kitchen garden still producing despite the early frost, the scorched house that had almost burned but didn't. 2 months ago, this place had been nothing to her, just a desperate option when all other doors closed. Now it felt like the only home she'd ever really had, and in a few hours it would belong to someone else. The unfairness of it should have broken her. Instead, it made her angry, made her determined, made her ready to fight one last time, even knowing they'd probably lose. She turned to find Ronan watching her from the porch, his expression soft. "Ready?" he asked. "No, but let's go anyway." They rode into Red Hollow for the last time as owners of Broken Creek Ranch. The ride into town felt different this time. Final. Like they were marching toward an execution they'd been sentenced to months ago, the verdict already written in Gideon Voss's neat banker's hand. The morning sun was too bright, the sky too clear. It should have been raining, Lenora thought. Weather should match the occasion. They arrived at the bank 15 minutes before noon. A small crowd had already gathered. Not supporters, just spectators drawn by the promise of drama. The same people who'd laughed when Samuel Garrett rejected her now waited to watch her lose everything else. Lenora recognized faces from the train platform, from the general store, from a dozen small humiliations over the past 2 months. She dismounted and tied her horse to the rail, her burned hands making the knot clumsy. Ronan stood beside her, his jaw set, his eyes scanning the crowd for threats. "You don't have to do this," he said quietly. "You could leave right now. This doesn't have to be your fight anymore." "It's been my fight since the day I stayed." She straightened her dress, the same one she'd worn that first day, now patched and faded. "Besides, where would I go? Anywhere. Somewhere new. Somewhere people don't know about any of this. I'm tired of running from places that don't want me." She met his eyes. "I'd rather stand and fight, even if we lose." He nodded, something like pride flickering across his features. Then he took her hand, scarred and bandaged as it was, and they walked toward the bank together. The doors were already open. Inside, Gideon Voss stood behind a large desk, flanked by his lawyer and a man wearing a territorial marshal's badge. Papers were spread across the polished wood surface, everything official and legal and irreversible. Voss looked up as they entered, his expression professionally sympathetic. "Mr. Creed, Miss Vale, thank you for being punctual. This should only take a few minutes." "I'm sure it will." Ronan's voice was flat. "You've had this planned for months. I followed proper legal procedure for a defaulted loan. There's a difference." Voss gestured to the papers. "If you'd like to review the documents before we proceed." "We know what they say." Lenora stepped forward, pulling the bag of money from her coat. "We have $1,800, partial payment on the debt. We're requesting an extension of 30 days to raise the remainder." The lawyer, a thin man with spectacles, shook his head before Voss could respond. "The loan documents don't allow for partial payment once foreclosure proceedings have begun. We've been over this." "We're asking anyway." Voss spread his hands in a gesture of helplessness. "Miss Vale, I appreciate your determination. I truly do. But my hands are tied by the contract your employer signed. If I made exceptions for everyone in financial difficulty, I wouldn't be a very good banker, would I? You're not a very good banker anyway, Ronan said. You're just a man who knows how to dress up theft in legal language. The marshal shifted uncomfortably. Mr. Creed, I'd advise you to keep a civil tongue. This is a legal proceeding. Is it? Or is it just Gideon Voss taking what he wants with the law's blessing? Careful. Voss's smile thinned. You're dangerously close to slander. It's only slander if it's not true. The doors behind them opened and Eleanor Pratt walked in, followed by her 3 children. She wore her Sunday dress despite it being Tuesday, and her face was set with determination. I'm here as a witness, she announced, for Mr. Creed and Miss Vale. Voss's expression flickered, just for a second, surprise crossing his features. Mrs. Pratt, this is a private proceeding. Marshal Thompson's here. That makes it official territorial business, which means it's public. Eleanor positioned herself beside Lenora. I have a right to witness. The marshal nodded reluctantly. She's correct. If this is an official foreclosure, any citizen can observe. More people filed in. Jacob Moss, the old rancher who'd paid $50 for water access. Martha Collins and her husband. A widow named Sarah Chen, Mr. Chen's sister, who'd lost her house to the bank 3 years ago. One by one, they filled the bank's main room, a silent jury watching Voss work. His jaw tightened. This is highly irregular. But legal, the marshal said. Let's proceed. Voss shuffled his papers, his movements slightly less smooth now. Very well. The matter at hand is a defaulted loan in the amount of $3,200. The borrower, Ronan Creed, has failed to meet the payment schedule outlined in the original contract. As of today, the full amount is due. Mr. Creed, do you have payment in full? No. Then by the terms of the contract, the property known as Broken Creek Ranch, including all structures, livestock, equipment, and water rights, will transfer to the First Bank of Red Hollow, effective immediately. He pushed a document across the desk. Sign here to acknowledge the transfer. Ronan didn't move. I want it stated for the record that this foreclosure is a result of predatory lending practices. The interest rate on this loan was double the standard territorial rate. The payment schedule was designed to be impossible to meet, and the acceleration clause used to move up today's deadline was deliberately triggered by actions taken by the bank itself. The lawyers started to object, but the marshal held up a hand. Let him speak. 2 nights ago, 3 men set fire to our house, the same way our barn was burned 6 weeks earlier. One of those men admitted they were following orders. We all know whose orders. Ronan's voice rose. Gideon Voss has systematically destroyed our ability to make payments while hiding behind legal documents. That's not business. That's theft. Do you have proof of these accusations? The lawyer asked. Witnesses saw the barn fire, saw the scorched side of our house. Witnesses to fire, yes, but witnesses to Mr. Voss ordering those fires? Any evidence connecting him directly? Ronan's silence was answer enough. Voss leaned back in his chair, his confidence returning. You see the problem, Mr. Creed. You're confusing unfortunate circumstances with deliberate action. Fires happen. Accidents occur. Without proof of intent, you're simply a man who couldn't meet his obligations making wild accusations. I have proof, a voice said from the back. Everyone turned. Mary Chen stood in the doorway, her face pale but determined. Her father was beside her, his expression torn between pride and terror. What kind of proof? The marshal asked. Mary walked forward, pulling a folded paper from her apron. A letter, written by Mr. Voss to a man named Jack Sutton, asking him to arrange an accident at the Creed Ranch that would damage property but not hurt anyone, dated 2 weeks before the barn fire. The room went absolutely silent. Voss stood slowly, his face carefully blank. That's a forgery. Is it? Mary handed the letter to the marshal. Because it's written on your bank's letterhead, and that's your signature at the bottom. I know because I've seen it on documents at my father's store. Where did you get this? Voss demanded. I clean your offices twice a week. You left it in your waste bin. I thought it was trash. Her voice shook slightly but held, until I heard about the barn fire and realized what it meant. The marshal read the letter, his expression darkening. Mr. Voss, this appears to be your handwriting. It's a forgery, Voss repeated. The girl is lying to help her friends. I'm not lying. Mary met his eyes. And I'm not the only one who's seen you do things like this. Sarah Chen, tell them about your foreclosure. The widow stepped forward, her hands twisted in her skirt. 3 years ago, Mr. Voss loaned my husband money to expand our store. 6 months later, our main supplier refused to do business with us anymore. Said they'd been told we were financially unstable. We lost half our income overnight. Her voice grew stronger. My husband went to other suppliers, but they all said the same thing. Someone had spread rumors about us. We couldn't prove it was Voss, but we knew. And when we couldn't make loan payments, he took everything. Our store, our home, our savings. That's business, Voss said tightly. Not my fault your husband made bad decisions. What about the Thornton Ranch? Jacob Moss spoke up, his old voice carrying. Lost their water access because someone filed a territorial claim against their deed. Took them 2 years to fight it in court, and by then they'd lost the property to debt. You bought that land for pennies. Or the Morrison family, Martha Collins added. Their barn burned down just like the Creeds. 1 month later, foreclosure. More voices joined in. Story after story of suspicious coincidences, of financial ruin that followed too neat a pattern to be accidental. The marshal listened, his hand resting on the letter Mary had provided, his face growing grimmer. Voss's lawyer stepped forward. Marshal Thompson, these are all unsubstantiated allegations, gossip and coincidence. The only matter at hand is a defaulted loan. The letter isn't unsubstantiated, the marshal said slowly. If this is genuine, it's evidence of criminal conspiracy. It's not genuine, Voss snapped. It's a transparent attempt to avoid legitimate debt. Then you won't mind if I have it examined by a handwriting expert. I mind very much. This is a witch hunt based on the word of a disgruntled Chinese girl and a collection of failures looking for someone to blame. The casual racism in his voice made Mary flinch. Her father put a hand on her shoulder, his own face hard. Lenora had been quiet through all of this, letting the testimonies wash over her. But now she stepped forward, her burned hands visible to everyone. I got these pulling horses out of our burning barn, she said. Ronan got his trying to do the same. We nearly died saving animals from a fire that started in the middle of the night, in a locked barn, with no possible natural cause. She held up her hands. These scars are evidence, Mr. Voss. Evidence that someone wanted to destroy us. And if that letter is real, if you ordered that fire, then you're not just a thief. You're attempted murderer. That's absurd, is it? Because from where I stand, it looks like you've been systematically destroying anyone who gets in your way for years. You just got sloppy this time. Left evidence where someone could find it. Voss's face had gone red. Marshal Thompson, I demand you end this farce immediately. The foreclosure proceedings should continue, and these slanderous accusations should be— The proceedings are suspended, the marshal said quietly, pending investigation into these allegations. You can't do that. I can and I am. If there's evidence of criminal activity related to this loan, the foreclosure can't proceed until that's resolved. He folded the letter carefully. Mr. Voss, I'll need you to come to my office to provide a formal statement. I'll do no such thing. I have rights. So do the people you've allegedly defrauded. The marshal's voice went hard. Now you can come voluntarily, or I can make it official. Your choice. Voss looked around the room, at the faces of people he'd controlled through fear and financial power. For the first time since Lenora had met him, he looked uncertain, cornered. This isn't over, he said finally. I have lawyers, resources. You can't prove anything. Maybe not. The marshal gestured toward the door. But right now you're coming with me. As Voss left, flanked by the marshal and looking smaller somehow, the bank fell silent. Then Eleanor Pratt started clapping. Slowly at first, then faster. Others joined in until the whole room applauded. Not for victory, because nothing was won yet, but for the possibility of it. For the first time anyone could remember, Gideon Voss had been publicly challenged and forced to retreat. Lenora felt Ronan's hand find hers, squeezing gently. She squeezed back, afraid to believe this was real. Mary approached them, her face still pale but determined. I should have come forward sooner. I've known for months that he was doing things like this, but I was scared. My father needs his business, and Voss could destroy it with a word. You came forward when it mattered, Lenora said. That took courage. Did it? Or did I just wait until someone else was desperate enough to force the issue? Mary's voice was bitter. I'm not proud of my timing. Mr. Chen stepped forward then, his face unreadable. He looked at Lenora for a long moment, then said something in Cantonese to his daughter. Mary's eyes widened. My father says he's sorry, she translated, for not helping sooner, for being afraid. He says fear makes cowards of good men, and he's ashamed. Tell him I understand, Lenora said. Fear is a powerful thing. Mr. Chen nodded, then surprised her by bowing slightly, a gesture of respect she hadn't expected. He said something else, and Mary smiled. He says you're braver than most men he knows, and stubborner than a mule. She paused. That's a compliment, by the way. The crowd began to disperse, people filing out with the stunned air of those who'd witnessed something unexpected. The lawyer had disappeared somewhere, probably to consult with Voss's other associates. The bank stood empty except for Lenora, Ronan, and a few lingerers. What happens now? Ronan asked. Investigation, probably. Could take weeks. Months, even. Lenora felt exhaustion crash over her like a wave. They'd fought so hard, and all they'd won was a delay. And in the meantime? In the meantime, the foreclosure is suspended, which means the ranch is still ours. He smiled, tired but genuine. We bought ourselves time. Time to do what? We still owe the money. Even if Voss goes to prison, the debt doesn't disappear. No, but maybe the terms can be renegotiated with whoever takes over the bank, or maybe we can find other investors. Or maybe... He stopped, shook his head. I don't know, but we're still standing. That's more than I expected an hour ago. They walked out into the bright afternoon, squinting against the sun. The street had mostly cleared, people returning to their normal routines now that the show was over. But a few waited. Eleanor with her children, the Collinses, Jacob Moss, Sarah Chen. We wanted to talk to you, Eleanor said, about the ranch. Lenora's stomach tightened. What about it? We've been talking among ourselves, about what Voss said in there, about us being failures looking for someone to blame. Eleanor's jaw set. Maybe we are failures. Maybe we did make bad decisions, but we also know what it's like to be crushed by someone with more power and no conscience, and we don't want to see it happen again. What are you saying? Ronan asked. Jacob Moss stepped forward. We're saying we want to help, however we can. Money, if we can spare it. Labor, testimony, whatever you need to keep fighting. We can't pay you back, Lenora said. We can barely pay the debt we have. We're not asking to be paid back, Martha Collins spoke up. We're asking to invest in you, in the idea that maybe, just maybe, someone can stand up to men like Voss and win. Sarah Chen nodded. When my husband died, I thought about giving up, moving away, starting over somewhere nobody knew me. But then I realized that's what Voss wanted, for everyone he hurt to disappear quietly. Well, I'm tired of being quiet, and I'm tired of disappearing. Lenora felt tears prick her eyes. She blinked them back, stubborn to the end. We're not exactly a good investment. Maybe not financially, Eleanor said, but in every other way. You're the best investment I've seen in years. They talked for another hour, standing in the street like conspirators planning a rebellion, which, in a way, they were. Eleanor could spare $20 more. Jacob offered $50. The Collinses had labor to contribute. Their oldest son was good with carpentry, could help rebuild the barn. Sarah Chen knew how to keep books and offered to manage the ranch accounts properly. By the time they finished, Lenora's head was spinning with numbers and plans and possibilities. It still wasn't enough to pay the full debt. But it was something, more than something. It was proof that they weren't alone. As the group began to disperse, promising to meet again in 2 days to finalize plans, Mrs. Hadley appeared. The boarding house landlady looked uncomfortable, shifting her weight from foot to foot. Miss Vale, Mr. Creed, might I have a word? They stepped aside and Mrs. Hadley pulled out a small envelope. I heard what happened in there, about the letter and the investigation. She pressed the envelope into Lenora's hand. This is everything I've saved over the past 5 years. $230. I want you to have it. Mrs. Hadley, I can't. You can, and you will. I've watched you these past months, watched you work yourself half to death for a place most people would have abandoned. Watched you stand up when it would have been easier to fall down. Her stern face softened slightly. My husband died in a mining accident 20 years ago. Company blamed him for being careless, paid me $30 for his life, and told me to be grateful. I know what it's like when powerful men decide you don't matter. So take the money. Use it to fight back. Lenora took the envelope with shaking hands. I don't know how to thank you. Win. That's how you thank me. Beat that smug bastard and prove that decent people still matter. Mrs. Hadley nodded once, sharp and final, then walked away before Lenora could say anything else. Ronan was staring at her. Did that just happen? I think so. Lenora looked down at the envelope, at the worn bills inside representing years of careful saving. People are helping us. Yes. Why? We're nobody. We have nothing to offer them. We offered them hope. Ronan's voice was rough. The idea that fighting back is possible, that's worth more than money to people who've been stepped on. They walked to where they'd tied their horses, moving slowly, both overwhelmed by the day's events. The foreclosure had been suspended. Evidence against Voss was being investigated. People were rallying to help. It was more than they'd dared hope for. But as they prepared to mount up, a figure stepped out from between buildings. Samuel Garrett, looking worse than Lenora remembered, thinner, with shadows under his eyes and a hunted look about him. Lenora, I need to talk to you. Ronan moved to intercept, but Lenora put a hand on his arm. It's all right. Samuel shifted nervously, not quite meeting her eyes. I heard what happened. At the bank, everyone's talking about it. So I wanted to apologize for what I did. At the train station. He finally looked at her, and his face was miserable. I was cruel and stupid, and I've regretted it every day since. Lenora studied him, this man whose rejection had started everything, whose cowardice had set her on the path that led here. She should hate him. Part of her did. But mostly she felt nothing. He was just a weak man who'd made a weak choice. Why are you telling me this? She asked. Because Voss came to see me this morning, before the foreclosure. He was angry about something, I don't know what. And he let slip that he'd encouraged me to reject you. Said you looked like trouble, like the kind of woman who'd cause problems. He suggested I'd be better off looking elsewhere for a wife. Samuel's voice dropped. I was so relieved to have an excuse not to go through with it that I didn't question why a banker cared about my marriage. But now I see. He was already planning to use you somehow, and I helped him do it. The words landed like stones. Gideon Voss had orchestrated even that first humiliation, had seen Lenora get off the train and immediately identified her as someone who might interfere with his plans for the Creed Ranch. So he'd whispered poison in Samuel's ear, turned a weak man's doubts into public rejection. You should tell the marshal, Ronan said. That's evidence. I will. I plan to. Samuel looked at Lenora. I know it doesn't fix anything. No, I can't take back what I did. But I wanted you to know the truth. And I wanted to say, I'm sorry. You deserved better. Yes, Lenora said simply. I did. She mounted her horse and rode away without looking back, leaving Samuel Garrett standing in the street with his apologies and his regrets. Ronan followed, and they rode in silence until the town disappeared behind them. Are you all right? He asked finally. I don't know. Ask me tomorrow. She took a breath. Voss planned all of this from the beginning, saw me as a problem, and tried to eliminate me before I could become one. He failed. Did he? We still might lose everything. But we're still fighting. That's what matters. They rode the rest of the way in comfortable silence, the afternoon sun warm on their backs. The ranch came into view, still scarred from fire, still broken in places, but standing. Theirs, for now at least. As they dismounted, Lenora noticed a figure waiting on the porch. A woman in her 50s, well-dressed, with steel-gray hair and sharp eyes. She stood as they approached. Mr. Creed? Miss Vale? I'm Margaret Thornton. My family used to own the ranch 3 miles east of here before Voss took it. She held up a leather folder. I heard what happened today in town, and I thought you might want to see these. What are they? Ronan asked. Documents. Letters. Evidence my husband collected before he died, trying to prove Voss's corruption. He never got the chance to use them. The stress of fighting killed him. Heart attack. Her voice was steady, but her eyes were hard. But I kept everything. Figured someday it might matter. Sounds like today's that day. She handed over the folder. Inside were dozens of documents, letters between Voss and various officials, records of suspicious transactions, testimony from people who'd been ruined, years of evidence, carefully preserved. Why now? Lenora asked. Why not come forward before? Because before, nobody was fighting back. Nobody seemed to think it was worth the risk. Margaret met her eyes. You made it worth it. You stood up when everyone else, including me, was too scared or too tired. So now I'm standing up too. Better late than never. After Margaret left, promising to give her testimony to the marshal, Lenora and Ronan sat on the porch steps and went through the documents. Each one was another nail in Gideon Voss's coffin, evidence of fraud, intimidation, bribery. Proof that his corruption ran deep and wide. This could destroy him, Ronan said quietly. Not just the bank, him personally. He could go to prison. Good. Lenora. He tried to burn us alive, Ronan, twice. He ruined dozens of families, drove Margaret's husband to death from stress. He deserves prison. I'm not disagreeing, I'm just... He set down the papers. I'm amazed that people are helping, that they kept evidence, that any of this is happening. You thought we'd lose. I thought we already had. He took her hand. But you never did. Even when I gave up, you kept fighting. Why? Lenora was quiet for a long moment, watching the sun sink toward the mountains. Because I spent my whole life being told I didn't matter. That I was too plain, too old, too difficult. I came here thinking maybe the frontier would be different. And when it wasn't, when Samuel rejected me and the town laughed, I could have left. Could have gone back east and proven everyone right about me. But you stayed. I stayed because I was tired of disappearing, tired of being the woman people forgot about. So I decided that if I was going to fail, it would be loud, public, impossible to ignore. She smiled, bitter and fierce. Turns out fighting back gets people's attention. You did more than get attention. You started something. Maybe. Or maybe people were just waiting for someone to go first, to show it was possible to stand up without being destroyed. She looked at him. Either way, we're not done yet. The investigation could take months. Voss has money and connections. He'll fight back. Let him. We've got something he doesn't. What's that? The truth, and people who care about it. Ronan stood, pulling her up with him. Come on. We should make supper. Tomorrow we start planning what comes next. But Lenora didn't move. She stood there on the porch, looking at the ranch she'd fought so hard for, and felt something shift inside her chest. Not hope. She'd learned hope was dangerous, but determination, resolve. She'd come to Red Hollow broken and rejected, expecting nothing, believing herself worth less than nothing. And somehow, in fighting for a piece of land that wasn't even hers, she'd found something worth more than marriage or respectability or any of the things she'd thought she wanted. She'd found herself. The version of herself that didn't disappear when things got hard, that stood and fought and refused to break. Whatever happened next, victory or defeat, success or ruin, she'd face it as that woman. The woman the frontier had tried to reject, but who'd rejected the frontier's verdict instead. And that, she realized, was worth more than any ranch, more than any amount of money. It was worth everything. The investigation moved slower than erosion. Marshal Thompson was thorough, which Lenora appreciated, but thorough meant weeks of testimony, document review, and careful procedural steps that felt endless when you were living on borrowed time. The ranch existed in a strange limbo. Not foreclosed, but not exactly theirs either. Everything depended on whether the marshal's findings would be enough to break Gideon Voss's grip on the county. 3 weeks after the suspended foreclosure, Ronan came in from checking fences to find Lenore at the kitchen table surrounded by papers, her scarred hands working through columns of numbers for the third time that day. You're going to wear a hole in that page, he said, pouring himself coffee. The numbers don't add up. We've collected almost $2,000 from investors and water rights sales, but the debt is $3,200. We're still short $1,300 even with everything people have given us. We've got time. The marshal said the investigation could take 2 months. And then what? Even if Voss goes to prison, someone still owns that loan. The debt doesn't disappear just because he's a criminal. Ronan sat down across from her, his coffee steaming between them. You're scared. Of course I'm scared. We've been fighting for 3 months and we're still losing, just slower than before. That's not losing, that's surviving. Is there a difference? He reached across and took her hand, careful of the healing burns. Yes, losing is what I was doing when you got here. Drinking myself to death and letting everything fall apart. Surviving is what we're doing now. Fighting, planning, hoping things might actually work out. Hope is dangerous, Lenora said, but she didn't pull her hand away. So is giving up. They were still sitting there when someone knocked on the door. Lenora's first instinct was fear. Had Voss sent more men? But Ronan seemed to read her expression and squeezed her hand once before standing. It was Mary Chen carrying a basket and looking nervous. I have news, she said without preamble. Can I come in? They sat in the kitchen, and Mary pulled out a newspaper from her basket. The Territorial Gazette, dated 2 days ago. She opened it to the second page and pointed to an article. Territorial Marshal recommends charges against Red Hollow banker, the headline read. Below it, a detailed account of the investigation's findings: fraud, arson conspiracy, intimidation, bribery of local officials. The evidence was overwhelming. The recommendation was prosecution. Lenora read it twice, her heart hammering. It means they're building a case, Mary said. My father heard from the marshal's office that they're planning to arrest Voss formally next week. And once he's arrested, the territorial government will seize his assets pending trial, including the bank. So the loan goes into receivership. Someone from the territorial office will take over management until everything's sorted out. Mary smiled. And that someone might be more willing to renegotiate terms than Voss ever was. For the first time in months, Lenora felt something like real hope unfurl in her chest. Not the desperate, clawing hope of someone drowning, but actual possibility. They might win this. They might actually win. Ronan was reading the article again, his expression cautious. It says, recommends charges. That's not the same as filing them. There's still a chance the territorial attorney won't pursue it. The attorney is Rebecca Moss, Mary said, Jacob Moss's niece. She's been looking for a way to take down Voss for years. This is her chance. Politics, Ronan muttered. I hate politics. Politics is the only reason we're still standing, Lenora pointed out. If the territorial government didn't care about corruption, we'd already be gone. They talked for another hour, Mary filling them in on town gossip, how opinion had shifted after the bank confrontation, how people who'd once avoided Lenora now nodded politely when she passed, how Voss's support was crumbling as more victims came forward. It wasn't universal. Plenty of people still thought Voss was being railroaded by jealous failures. But the tide was turning. After Mary left, Lenora stood on the porch and looked at the ranch with new eyes. The burned barn site where they'd started clearing debris for rebuilding, the repaired fences, the animals grazing peacefully, the scorched section of house wall that they'd patched with mismatched boards because matching lumber cost money they didn't have. It was still broken in places, still showed its scars, but it was standing. They were standing. What are you thinking? Ronan asked from the doorway. That I spent my whole life trying to be someone I wasn't, trying to be pretty enough or quiet enough or proper enough to deserve good things, and it never worked. She turned to face him. But here, fighting for something that mattered, being stubborn and difficult and refusing to quit, that worked. That got results. You think stubbornness is a virtue now? I think it's the only virtue that matters when people are trying to crush you. He smiled and pulled her close, kissing the top of her head. You're going to be insufferable when we win this, aren't you? When we win this, I'm going to be the most insufferable woman in the entire territory. I'm looking forward to it. The arrest happened on a Tuesday morning. Lenora and Ronan were in town buying supplies when they saw Marshal Thompson and 2 deputies walk into the bank. 5 minutes later, they emerged with Gideon Voss in handcuffs. The street went silent. People stopped mid-conversation to stare. Voss walked with his head high, his face carefully blank. But Lenora could see the rage simmering beneath the surface. When he spotted her and Ronan watching from across the street, something vicious flickered in his eyes. This isn't over, he called out. I have lawyers, connections. You haven't won anything. We've won you in handcuffs, Ronan called back. That's enough for today. The crowd that had gathered murmured at that. A few people even smiled. Voss's face went red, but the marshal was already guiding him toward the jail, and whatever response he'd planned died unspoken. Lenora watched him go and felt no triumph, just exhaustion and a grim satisfaction that justice was finally catching up to power. "Come on," she said to Ronan, "let's finish shopping and go home." But as they walked toward the general store, people approached them. Mrs. Hadley, offering quiet congratulations. Eleanor Pratt, gripping Lenora's arm and thanking her for not giving up. Even Samuel Garrett, who'd been avoiding her for weeks, stopped them outside the post office. "I testified yesterday," he said. "Told them everything Voss said to me about you, about how he wanted you gone from the start." He looked miserable. "I know it doesn't fix what I did, but I wanted you to know." "Thank you," Lenore said, because what else was there to say? His testimony mattered legally, even if it couldn't undo the humiliation of that first day. Inside the general store, Mr. Chen greeted them with actual warmth instead of his usual careful neutrality. "Miss Vale, Mr. Creed, I heard the news. I'm very glad." "Thank you, Mr. Chen. Mary told me what you did, standing up when everyone else was afraid. It made me ashamed of my own fear." He pulled out his account book. "Your credit is good here, whatever you need. Pay when you can." It was a small thing, but small things had kept them alive this long. They loaded their supplies and rode home in the late afternoon sun, both quiet, both processing what the arrest meant. The territory would move forward with prosecution. The bank would be investigated. Their loan would be under new management. Everything was changing. "What if the new manager still demands full payment?" Lenore asked as they approached the ranch. "Then we negotiate. Show them the water rights contracts. Prove the land can generate income. Make a case for restructuring the debt. And if they won't listen, then we fight harder." Ronan glanced at her. "But I don't think it'll come to that. The territory wants to make an example of Voss. That means helping his victims, not continuing his work." Lenora wanted to believe him, but belief had been burned out of her by too many disappointments. She'd learned to trust action over promises, results over hope. The answer came 2 weeks later in the form of a letter from the territorial receiver's office. Lenora read it 3 times before her hands stopped shaking enough to show Ronan. The debt was being restructured. New terms, 15 years instead of 5, interest reduced to the standard territorial rate, no acceleration clauses, no penalties for early payment. Monthly installments they could actually afford if the ranch kept producing. It wasn't forgiveness, but it was survival. They'd won. Not completely. The debt was still there, still a weight they'd carry for years. But it was a manageable weight now, a challenge instead of a death sentence. Ronan read the letter twice, then set it down carefully like it might disappear if handled roughly. "We should celebrate." "How? We can barely afford food." "We'll figure something out." He stood and pulled her to her feet. "We just saved the ranch, Lenore. That deserves marking." They ended up sitting on the porch with tin cups of terrible whiskey Ronan had hidden in the barn, watching the sunset paint the mountains gold and red. It wasn't fancy, but it was theirs. "What happens now?" Lenore asked. "We rebuild the barn, plant for next season, keep selling water access, work the debt down year by year." He paused. "We survive." "That's it? Just survival?" "That's everything." He turned to look at her, his eyes serious. 3 months ago, I was ready to die. This ranch was ready to die. You changed that, changed me. So yes, survival is enough. Survival is the whole point. Lenora thought about that, about how her entire adult life had been about surviving. Surviving her mother's death and her father's drinking. Surviving poverty and loneliness and the constant grinding knowledge that she wasn't what anyone wanted. She'd come to Red Hollow hoping for more than survival, hoping for a life that mattered, and somehow, impossibly, fighting for this broken ranch with this broken man had given her exactly that. "I love you," she said. Not for the first time, but it still felt important to say, to make real with words. "I love you too." Ronan set down his cup and pulled something from his pocket. A ring, simple silver, slightly tarnished, clearly old. This was Catherine's. Her grandmother's before that. "I want you to have it." Lenora's breath caught. "Ronan, I'm not asking you to replace her. Nobody could. But I am asking if you'll marry me. If you'll stay here, not because you have nowhere else to go, but because you want to. Because this is home." She looked at the ring, at his hopeful, terrified face, at the ranch spreading out around them in the fading light. 3 months ago, she'd arrived expecting a wedding and got public humiliation instead. Now here was a proposal that mattered, offered by a man who saw her clearly and wanted her anyway. "Yes," she said, "on one condition." "What's that?" "We do it right. Proper ceremony. Witnesses. The whole town invited. I want everyone who laughed at the train station to see what I built from that rejection." Ronan grinned. "That's either the most romantic or most vindictive thing I've ever heard." "It's both. I contain multitudes." He slipped the ring onto her finger. It fit perfectly, which seemed impossible but also inevitable. Everything about this felt inevitable now, like all those weeks of fighting had been leading here, to this porch, this moment, this choice. They were married 6 weeks later in front of the half-rebuilt barn. The whole town did come, drawn by curiosity and gossip, and the simple fact that it was the social event of the season. Eleanor and Martha had helped Lenora make a dress from fabric Mrs. Hadley contributed. It wasn't fancy, but it was clean and new and hers. The ceremony itself was simple. A circuit judge passing through agreed to officiate. Ronan wore his best shirt, freshly mended by Mary Chen. They stood in front of the barn framework and promised forever to each other while the sun set behind them. Lenora looked out at the crowd during the vows and saw familiar faces. Mrs. Hadley, stern but approving. The Collinses, Martha dabbing at her eyes. Jacob Moss, nodding like he'd expected this all along. Mary and her father both smiling. Even Samuel Garrett had come, standing at the back looking uncomfortable but present. And in the front row, an empty chair. For Catherine, Ronan had explained, because she'd built this place, and even though she was gone, she deserved to witness what came next. When the judge pronounced them married, the crowd applauded. Not the mocking laughter from the train platform, but genuine celebration. Lenora kissed her husband and felt something in her chest finally settle, like a bone broken long ago, finally healing straight. The reception was potluck. Everyone brought what they could spare. Someone produced a fiddle. People danced in the yard while children chased chickens, and adults swapped stories. It wasn't sophisticated or elegant, but it was real. It was community. Later, after most guests had left and the stars were coming out, Eleanor approached Lenora with a strange expression. "I have something to tell you," she said. "Something I should have said months ago." "What is it?" "When you first came to town, when Samuel rejected you, I was there. I watched it happen. And I laughed." Eleanor's voice was steady, but her eyes were ashamed. "Not because I thought it was funny, but because I was relieved. Relieved it was happening to someone else instead of me. Relieved I wasn't the town joke that day." Lenora remembered seeing her at the train platform, a woman in a green dress, whispering behind her hand. "And then I watched you fight," Eleanor continued. "Watched you refuse to disappear or give up. Watched you turn rejection into something stronger. And I realized I'd spent years being small and quiet and afraid, hoping that would keep me safe. But it just made me invisible. Forgettable." She met Lenora's eyes. "You taught me that being seen, even when it's hard, is better than hiding. So thank you for showing me what courage actually looks like." She left before Lenora could respond, melting back into the small crowd of remaining guests. But her words stayed, settling like sediment. That was the thing about fighting publicly, Lenora realized. About refusing to disappear when people wanted you gone. It wasn't just about winning your own battles. It was about showing others that battles could be won, that refusing to accept defeat was possible. She'd come to Red Hollow broken and humiliated, believing herself worthless. She'd fought her way back not to prove Samuel wrong. He didn't matter anymore. But to prove herself right. To prove that her worth wasn't determined by who wanted her, or how she looked, or whether she fit neatly into someone else's expectations. Her worth was in her work, in her stubbornness, in her absolute refusal to let other people's judgments become her truth. The party wound down as the night grew late. Ronan found her sitting on the porch steps, watching the last few guests prepare to leave. "Happy?" he asked. Exhausted. But yes, happy. Good. He sat beside her, their shoulders touching. "You know what I realized today?" "What's that?" "Samuel Garrett did you a favor. If he'd married you like he promised, you'd be miserable right now. Trapped in a life you didn't want with a man too weak to appreciate you. Instead, I'm trapped on a failing ranch with a recovering drunk. Hey, I'm a recovering drunk with a rebuilt barn and restructured debt. Show some respect." She laughed and leaned against him. "You're right, though, about Samuel. I spent the whole train ride here imagining what our life would be like. Simple and quiet, respectable, safe." She looked at the ranch, at the barn rising from ashes, at the land they'd fought so hard for. "This is better. Harder, but better. Because? Because I earned it. Nobody gave this to me out of pity or obligation. I fought for every inch of it. That makes it mine in a way nothing else has ever been." They sat in comfortable silence until the last guest left and they were alone with the stars and the sound of the creek and the knowledge that tomorrow would bring more work, more struggle, more fighting. But they'd face it together. Two people who'd been broken by different losses, rebuilt by shared determination. The months that followed weren't easy. The barn reconstruction took longer than planned and cost more than they'd budgeted. Winter came hard, and they lost 3 animals to cold they couldn't afford to prevent. The debt payments were manageable, but still tight, leaving no room for mistakes or bad luck. But they survived. More than survived. They built. The ranch slowly transformed from a broken dream into a working operation. Water rights payments provided steady income. They bought 3 new horses in spring. The kitchen garden expanded. Ronan stayed sober more days than not, and when he slipped, Lenore was there to pull him back. Gideon Voss's trial happened in the territorial capital, too far for most people to attend. But the verdict came back guilty on 7 counts of fraud and 2 of arson conspiracy, 15 years in territorial prison. His bank was liquidated, the assets sold to pay his victims. It wasn't full restitution, money couldn't undo destroyed lives. But it was something. Justice, delayed but delivered. A year after the wedding, Lenora stood in the same spot where she'd first seen the ranch, burned and broken and barely standing. Now a new barn rose where the old one had fallen, larger and sturdier. The fences were mended, the house repaired, animals grazed in healthy numbers. It wasn't perfect. The east pasture still flooded in heavy rain. The well needed replacing soon. They were still years away from paying off the debt. But it was theirs. Built by their hands, saved by their refusal to quit. Ronan found her there, watching the sunset paint everything gold. "What are you thinking about?" he asked. "About how I thought coming here was the end of my life, the final proof that I wasn't good enough for happiness." "And now? Now I think it was the beginning. Not of happiness, that's too simple, but of knowing I could survive anything, could fight for what mattered and maybe, just maybe, win." He pulled her close, and they stood together watching the day end and the night begin. Tomorrow would bring more work, more struggles, more of the endless fight to build something lasting from broken pieces. But Lenora had learned something in her months fighting for this ranch, this man, this life she'd carved from rejection and loss. She'd learned that the things you build yourself, the things you earn through stubbornness and sweat and refusing to disappear, those things last. Those things matter. She'd come to Red Hollow expecting a wedding and got public humiliation instead. But from that humiliation, she'd built a home, a marriage, a life that meant something. And that, she thought, watching the stars emerge one by one in the darkening sky, was worth more than any gentle acceptance ever could have been. Because acceptance given freely was fragile, dependent on others' opinions. But respect earned through fighting back, that was hers. Unshakable. Permanent. She was Lenora Creed now. The woman who'd refused to disappear. The woman who'd fought a banker and won. The woman whose scars, on her hands, on her heart, were proof not of damage, but of survival. And when people in Red Hollow told her story in years to come, and they would, because it was too good not to tell, they wouldn't remember the woman Samuel Garrett rejected at the train station. They'd remember the woman who turned rejection into revolution, who proved that sometimes the people everyone counts out are exactly the ones who change everything. That was her legacy. Not perfect, not pretty, but hers. Earned, real. And it was enough.